Imagine you were a 10-star martial artist, so powerful that most people spend their entire lives just trying to reach 5 stars. Our hero falls in life battle, undefeated by anyone but death, only to wake in a new life. He's reincarnated into a powerful family, where children of the main branch are revered, and everyone else is looked down upon. He's a legitimate child, a nobody in their eyes. Later, he joins the academy alongside other family kids. The main branch kids strut their status, full of arrogance. And then he arrives. He's here to prove that true power doesn't come from bloodlines. It comes from mastery. Our main character had only one lifelong ambition, to reach the very summit of martial arts. Yet deep down, he was fully aware that no matter how far he pushed himself, no matter how many battles he fought, that ultimate peak would always remain just out of reach. Still, his determination burned brighter than ever. He refused to accept defeat, clinging instead to an ancient tale passed down through generations, a legend that spoke of a golden fruit hidden inside a sacred sanctuary guarded by a mighty dragon. That fruit was said to grant eternal life, so without hesitation, he ventured into the dragon's lair. After a grueling, soul-crushing battle that nearly cost him everything, he stood victorious over the slain beast. Staring at the shining fruit before him, the man could hardly believe his eyes. Sitting proudly atop the dragon's corpse, he felt like a conqueror who had justified destiny itself. Confident that this was the key to surpassing all limits, he reached for the fruit, believing that by consuming it, he would ascend to the peak of martial mastery. His name was Gilphus Eldrigan, a man once revered as the strongest under the heavens. Years turned into decades, and now Gilphus lay frail and aged, surrounded by his loved ones. His eldest son, Gilliam, sat silently beside him, grief written all over his face. Gilphus, seeing the sorrow in his son's eyes, told him gently that his time had come and urged him to live righteously. Gilliam tried to stay strong, though tears welled in his eyes. Losing his father felt like reliving the pain of losing his mother. As Gilphus's breath grew weaker, his mind drifted back to the fabled fruit of immortality. He finally admitted to himself that it had all been a lie, yet he found comfort in the thought that he had lived with love, had a family, and experienced life to its fullest. But deep within his heart, he knew that was not the truth. He did have regrets. One burning regret that haunted him. He never truly reached the zenith of martial arts. Moments later, his eyes closed for the last time, or so it seemed. Suddenly, he opened them again. The world around him was strange and blurry. His body felt incredibly light. As he tried to move, he noticed his hands, tiny, soft, and chubby. Realization struck him like lightning. He had been reborn. Panic filled him for a moment, but he calmed himself. Recalling his experience as a 10-star martial master, he quickly assessed the situation and wondered who or what had caused this miracle. Then it hit him. The so-called immortality fruit. It wasn't meant to grant eternal life, it was a fruit of reincarnation. A laugh escaped his lips. What others might see as a curse, he saw as an opportunity. Fate had given him a second chance, another life to reach the true summit. Looking around, he saw several other infants beside him. From the luxurious surroundings, he deduced that he had been born into a powerful family. But something felt strange. Why were there so many babies in one place? Before he could figure it out, a few maids entered carrying feeding bottles filled with a crimson liquid. They picked up a baby, but not a human one, a goblin, and began feeding it. Gilphus froze in confusion. Then, to his horror, the goblin began convulsing violently and exploded into a burst of blood. Shock and dread filled him as the warm splatter hit his face. What kind of monstrosity were they feeding the babies? Unfazed, the maids murmured something about too much concentration and started diluting the red liquid. Moments later, one of them lifted him. Still shaken, Gilphus realized that what was inside the bottle wasn't milk. It pulsed with overwhelming magical energy. When the bottle was pressed into his mouth, he got a taste and instantly recognized it. It was ancient dragon's blood. His mind reeled. Feeding newborns. Dragon's blood was pure madness, but then he remembered how the maids had diluted it, perhaps to keep the infants from dying instantly. He wanted to spit it out, and though he swallowed a bit, he thought a small amount wouldn't harm him. Around him, the other babies were also spitting it out, coughing violently. But then, a thought flashed through his mind. What if this was an opportunity? If he could absorb all that magic instead of rejecting it, perhaps he could surpass even his former self. Determined, he stopped resisting and began drinking eagerly, draining the entire bottle with resolve blazing in his eyes. The maid froze, surprised that the baby was not only surviving but enjoying the dragon's blood. Once he finished, she laid him back in the cot, whispering that this one might be special. Soon, fatigue washed over him, and he drifted into a deep, satisfied sleep, the calm before transformation. 7 years later, a young boy was seen training in the courtyard, balancing a boulder on his feet while performing one-handed push-ups. He counted aloud as he reached his 1,000th repetition, then hurled the boulder far away with a single kick. His muscles gleamed with sweat and power. That boy was none other than Zeke Eldragon, the reincarnation of Gilfus. He looked at his reflection with pride, marveling at how much stronger he had become. Thanks to the dragon's blood he consumed as a baby, his body possessed strength far beyond any normal human. Combined with the divine dragon source he had mastered in his previous life, Zeke's body had transformed into something extraordinary, a vessel of limitless potential. However, his excitement dimmed a little when he realized he was still only a one-star warrior. In this world, a person's star represented their true power, their life's essence condensed into a blazing sphere of energy. The more stars one created, the stronger and more godlike they became. Zeke had once reached the mythical level of 10 stars, the highest anyone had ever achieved. And now, as he stood once again at the beginning, he vowed to surpass even that. It's been 7 years since Zeke was born as the son of the current head of the Eldragon family. Though the truth was less glorious, he was an illegitimate child. His mother had long since passed away, and his father had never once appeared before him. To Zeke, the very thought that such a worthless man was his father filled him with disgust. He had reincarnated into a world that was far crueler than the one he knew 1,000 years ago. A world where the strong thrived and the weak were mercilessly crushed. Among the traditions that survived the ages was a brutal ritual called the Dragon's Trial. Only those infants who survived drinking dragon's blood were recognized as future warriors of the Eldragon bloodline. Yet, despite surviving that deadly test, Zeke had never received a day of formal training. Frustrated, he questioned the maid who attended to him daily, but her response was always the same: "I am not permitted to speak of it." Zeke's patience wore thin. He reminded her that anyone who endured the trial was supposed to undergo combat training, yet he was surrounded only by silent maids. Not a single instructor in sight. The maid, emotionless as a puppet, merely asked if there was anything else he required. Zeke sighed and dismissed her. Though left alone, Zeke didn't despair. His focus wasn't on techniques or lessons. He was strengthening his own body, forging it into a weapon far beyond what his age should allow. Still, his curiosity lingered. He asked the maid once again about the other children of the main family, but as expected, she repeated the same phrase: "I'm not allowed to disclose that information." Annoyed beyond measure, Zeke wondered if that was the only line she knew how to say when he sarcastically asked if they kept him here just to mistreat him. She coldly replied that their orders were only to care for his needs. Zeke observed her carefully and noticed that she possessed the aura of a 3-star fighter. That was when he realized that, had she wanted to, she could have trained him, yet she chose not to. Losing interest in talking to a brick wall, Zeke decided it was time to take matters into his own hands. He left the house and ventured deep into the forest, something he had done countless times before. In the wilderness, Zeke began consuming poisonous herbs one after another, grimacing at their taste but ignoring the pain. To him, this was part of tempering his body. Poison, after all, could make one's body stronger if endured. As he continued his self-imposed training, he suddenly felt a faint presence following him. Someone or something was trailing him. Zeke could sense the black mist surrounding that figure, something he had never encountered in his previous life. Curious but unconcerned, he ignored it for the time being and continued forward. Moments later, an enraged boar emerged from the bushes, snorting furiously. The creature charged at him like a storm. Zeke smiled, planting his feet firmly. He waited until the boar was at full speed before twisting his body slightly and striking a clean punch straight into its abdomen. The sheer impact crushed the beast's organs instantly, killing it in a single blow. He looked down at the falling creature, surprised at the power behind what he considered a light hit. As a mere 1-star warrior, this level of strength shouldn't have been possible. It made him realize something profound. The quality of 1 star was far more important than how many one possessed. Hoisting the dead boar over his shoulder, Zeke began walking back home. He muttered to himself that living in isolation had grown dull, and that perhaps he needed a new goal, maybe even an adventure. The only problem was that the world beyond his borders was vast and dangerous, with the sea being the only route he could think of. Meanwhile, the mysterious person who had been shadowing him watched in disbelief. That boy, who had never been trained a single day in combat, had just killed a raging boar with 1 punch. Not only that, he had sensed the Watcher's presence despite their attempts to hide. There was no doubt left. Zeke Eldragon was no ordinary child. Still, the man knew the boy's background. Born of a dead mother and ignored by his father. Yet because he was the son of the family head, he couldn't simply be abandoned. His every movement had to be monitored closely. The man smirked beneath his hood. Things are finally getting interesting. Back at the estate, Zeke returned to find unfamiliar faces in the courtyard. Their powerful auras instantly caught his attention. Curious, he approached quietly and listened from outside the door. They weren't hostile, but their presence carried authority. Pushing the door open, Zeke asked bluntly why they had come. The men, all dressed in clothes bearing the L-Dragon crest, turned toward him. One of them stepped forward and stated plainly, "Young Master Zeke, we're here to escort you for an examination." Zeke's brows furrowed. What examination? Before he could protest further, they took him along to the main L-Dragon estate. For the first time in 7 years, he was stepping into the world he had only heard about. They dressed him in a formal uniform and brought him to a massive academy filled with other young members of the family. He soon learned the truth. This was the Dragon's Nest Academy, a place established by the L-Dragon clan itself. Every child born into the family was expected to attend once they reached the age of 7, and today was the day of the entrance examination. The only problem was that Zeke had never received any kind of prior education or preparation. Still, refusal wasn't an option. This test was mandatory, a family tradition he couldn't escape. As he walked through the academy gates, frustration welled up within him. While the other kids chatted and laughed, he kept to himself, lowering his head to ease his growing headache. A boy with bright blue hair suddenly approached him. "Hey, are you okay? You look like you're in pain," he said nervously. Zeke turned his gaze toward him with a cold look. "What do you want?" he asked flatly. The boy flinched slightly but replied kindly, "I just thought you might need help. You look troubled." Zeke was taken aback. There was something timid yet genuine about this boy. He could sense a faint, stable energy radiating from him. Relaxing a bit, Zeke apologized for his tone and introduced himself. He said, "I'm just confused about what's going on. Do you know what kind of test this is?" The boy smiled shyly. "I'm Langus from Old Scale Village. The test doesn't really change every year." Zeke raised a brow. "Then tell me, what kind of test is it?" Langus blinked, realizing Zeke truly had no idea. "Wait, you don't even know what the exam is about?" he asked in disbelief. Zeke simply shook his head. Langus sighed and began to explain, but before he could finish, a group of older students appeared, their laughter echoing through the corridor. One of them sneered and shouted, "Hey, look who we've got here, the runt from Old Scale Village." Zeke's expression darkened. Even he couldn't believe someone had the guts to call Langia a runt. The group of bullies was led by a young man named Retin, who, like Langus, hailed from Old Scale Village. Retin sneered at Langus, mocking him, asking why a runt like him even bothered to show up for the examination when he could just go home and waste his time playing. Langus, oblivious to the insult, calmly replied that he had come to take the exam, which only caused Retin to erupt in anger, yelling that Langus was a worthless weakling and that no one like him could ever hope to enter the academy. Laughing cruelly, reminding him that his father was a mock dragon, Zeke noticed the anger simmering in Langus as the boy's fists clenched tightly. The L-Dragon family maintained a strict hierarchy dictated by the absolute authority of the head of the clan. The rookies were called lesser dragons, common soldiers were young dragons, captains and senior fighters were adult dragons, while at the very top sat the elders, the elder dragons. But at the very bottom existed the mock dragons, a title reserved for those who failed past the Dragon's Nest entrance or couldn't graduate from the academy, considered fakes by society. Yet Langus carried a determination to prove that even those labeled as mock dragons could hold true strength. Zeke decided to intervene, stepping into the tense confrontation, and asked Retin how he could be so certain that Langus was worthless before even undergoing the exam. Retin froze, shocked by the unexpected interference. Demanding to know who Zeke was and why he dared question him, Zeke calmly replied that he had no quarrel with him, but was simply curious why Retin believed it was impossible for Langus to succeed. Retin sneered, insisting that people like Langus were weaklings. Zeke's eyes narrowed, and he told Retin firmly that Langus was stronger than him and his gang of bullies. Retin's face flushed with rage, asking if Zeke was implying that they were inferior to someone like Langus. Before the argument could escalate further, an examiner appeared. Calling the students to order and announcing that the entrance examination was about to begin, he instructed the applicants to register and pick a number tag. Retin glared at Zeke with unhidden disgust. Langus explained that students could technically withdraw if they felt incapable, which surprised Zeke even more, but Langus realized that this confirmed Zeke's complete ignorance of the rules. Still, Zeke firmly told him he had no intention of backing down. The examiner called everyone forward, explaining the rules. The goal was deceptively simple: leave a scratch on the regeneration stone in front of them. Weapons were only permitted if provided by the examiners. and bare hands were allowed. Each participant had 3 attempts. Zeke barely raised an eyebrow, seeing nothing particularly challenging. Langus, however, was horrified. Realizing the danger, Zeke merely shrugged, assuming it was a simple test, and even wondered why it seemed to surprise anyone given the trial of drinking dragon's blood they had survived as infants. The first participant approached, swinging his sword with all his might, but the force shattered the blade with a deafening clang, leaving him writhing on the ground. Unable to leave even a single scratch, the examiners asked if he would use his remaining attempts, but he was too injured to continue and was escorted away. Zeke noticed Langus's uneasy expression and wondered why he looked so worried given the exam appeared straightforward. Zeke asked him about the rock, and Langus explained that it was the regeneration stone, capable of instantly repairing minor scratches and reflecting any brute force attacks with 100-fold intensity. Zeke's eyes widened, realizing the stone was no ordinary obstacle. Langus went on to say that only those who could circulate their ether source power correctly could leave a mark, meaning that martial skill alone was not enough. It depended on controlling one's internal energy precisely. Zeke scanned the other participants, noticing that many had enough strength to leave a mark, including Retin and his gang. Yet he could hear students failing one by one, their arms broken from the attempt. When the examiner called number 315, Zeke's number, Langus panicked, urging him to withdraw, but Zeke assured him he would manage. Stepping up calmly, radiating an immense aura that made the examiner pause, Zeke was asked to select a weapon, but he declined, insisting his fists were sufficient. When the other students heard this, laughter erupted, doubting that anyone could scratch the stone with bare hands. Even Langus worried, believing Zeke's arms might be torn to pieces, and blamed himself for not stopping him, but Zeke had already made up his mind. The examiner nodded to Zeke, signaling that he could proceed. Zeke stepped forward, examining the regeneration stone carefully, his eyes scanning its strange surface. He admitted to himself that it was composed of a mineral he had never encountered before, clearly formed over centuries. He realized just how much he still didn't know about this world. But he decided that all of that knowledge could wait for later. Focusing only on the present challenge, Zeke summoned his energy, powering up, his fists radiating a golden light. Ready to strike the stone with all the force he could muster, he planned to use his signature technique, the Dragon Slayer combat form. A brilliant yellow aura flared around his body and arm as he drove his punch into the rock. The top of the stone exploded in a violent shatter, dust filling the air and a thunderous noise echoing across the courtyard. Everyone gasped, covering their eyes from the debris, but the examiner's gaze stayed fixed, calm and unshaken. Zeke exhaled, relieved, though he noticed the strain in his own body, his arm bleeding slightly and his uniform torn at the shoulder. Instead of feeling proud of the rock's destruction, he chastised himself, realizing his training still had a long way to go. The other students stared in disbelief, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Retin fumed with anger, his pride wounded, while Langus gawked in astonishment, his jaw practically on the floor. Even the examiner appeared startled, knowing that only a 4-star rank or higher could have produced such a strike, and Zeke, being an illegitimate child, made this feat even more improbable. The examiner studied him carefully, recognizing the technique from somewhere, and Zeke, sensing the man's curiosity, walked forward and asked, "So, did I pass?" The examiner confirmed with a nod, handing Zeke a small bottle filled with a glowing green liquid. Zeke asked the junior examiner about its contents, but the man simply glared at him with thinly veiled hatred, motioning for him to move aside. Zeke assumed it was a reward for passing the test, returning to Langus, who immediately praised him for the incredible feat he had just performed. Zeke questioned what the bottle contained, and Langus explained it was a healing potion. Though a standard grade one, Zeke examined it closely, noting that it didn't appear poisonous, his mind racing. Perhaps this was more than a simple potion, maybe even an elixir, substances known to be crafted from rare ingredients, combined with herbs that grew only in hidden realms, with cores extracted from divine or phantom beasts. A true elixir could heal old and fresh wounds instantly while boosting one's ether, though creating such a potion was notoriously difficult, ingredients being nearly impossible to find. With hesitation, Zeke drank the potion, and just as he suspected, his torn arm knit back together, the pain vanishing instantly. Zeke was stunned, realizing that this simple healing potion was in fact a genuine elixir. Langus admitted he had no idea what an elixir truly was, though he explained that the Eldragon family's healing potions were always far superior to anything available in the outside world. world. While Langus considered it normal, Zeke's mind reeled from the instant recovery, though he noticed that there was no surge of ether as one would expect from a proper elixir. Inspecting the bottle again, he realized this was humanity's best creation. After centuries of refinement, Langus complimented him, saying he was impressive, to which Zeke replied calmly that he only aimed to become the strongest. So this came as no surprise. Shortly after, Retin and his gang stepped up for their turn, all of them completing the test successfully, which didn't faze Zeke in the slightest. He had expected no less. Finally, applicant number 414 was called Langus, Zeke's timid blue-haired friend. His steps hesitant as he approached the test site, Zeke noticed his unease and urged him to steady himself, assuring him he would be fine. Langus turned with a sheepish expression, telling Zeke to stop setting the bar so high, taking a sword in hand. He prepared to strike the stone. Zeke observed carefully, wondering what the boy intended. Langus took a deep breath and launched his attack, yet the sword barely nicked the stone, failing to leave a mark, and he stumbled backward, nearly collapsing. The examiner reminded him he still had 2 attempts left. Langus scrambled to recover, striking again with renewed focus, but the result was the same. The stone remained unmarked, and frustration welled in him as he struggled, tears beginning to form, doubting himself under the mockery of Retin and the others, who jeered loudly, claiming the half-dragon child could never succeed. Reminding Zeke of their previous insult that Langus was weaker than them, the examiner then informed Langus that only 1 attempt remained. His hands trembling, his mind clouded with fear, he struggled to compose himself as darkness threatened to overwhelm his focus. Just then, Zeke's voice cut through the shadow surrounding Langus, asking him what he was doing. Langus spun around, startled and confused, and Zeke suggested he switch to a spear instead of a sword. Langus blinked, still puzzled, and Zeke repeated firmly that he meant exactly what he said, scolding him gently for insisting on a weapon that clearly didn't suit him. He reassured Langus that no matter how many times he tried with the sword, the rock wouldn't budge. Retin and his gang burst into mocking laughter once again, jeering at the notion that Langus could suddenly succeed since he had been trained only with the sword. They were certain that swapping weapons wouldn't change anything. Zeke, calm and confident, asked the examiner if changing weapons mid-test was allowed. The examiner nodded without hesitation, confirming there was no issue. Zeke turned to Langus with a grin, telling him to go ahead and use the spear. Standing like a motivational coach, he challenged Langus, asking if he was ready to back down like a failure, but Langus shook his head firmly, rising to his feet, vowing to take Zeke's advice and attempt the strike with the new weapon. Langus reflected briefly on his father, who had been barred from entering the dragon's nest and endured endless ridicule. Yet he never gave up, raising his son with care and dedication. Langus wanted to honor his father's sacrifices by proving that he wasn't a fake. He remembered Zeke's words about the sword being useless, and decided to place his trust in him despite their short acquaintance. Unsure how to wield the spear, Zeke simply instructed him to thrust straight, not overthinking it. Langus knew it was nearly impossible for a first-time spear user to damage the regeneration stone, but he understood he'd never know unless he tried. Motivated by Zeke's belief in him, he positioned himself, sensing the ether energy flowing differently through his body with the spear. Langus charged forward and struck, sending a massive shockwave through the air. Retin and his gang laughed, insisting the change in weapon made no difference. Yet their eyes widened as they realized Langus had actually made contact. The stone cracked, leaving them dumbfounded. Even the examiner's jaw dropped at Langus's feet. Zeke clapped proudly, celebrating his friend's success. Langus stared in disbelief as the examiner recorded his pass in the book, seeking confirmation, only for Zeke to wrap him in a congratulatory hug. Tears of joy streaming down Langus's face. Retin and his gang refused to accept the result, claiming it was pure luck. The examiner shouted at the top of his lungs that the examination had concluded and announced the next phase, the entrance ceremony. Zeke's eyes widened, astonished that scratching the stone had been the sole requirement. Langus warned him that there might be more tests after entering the academy. Zeke asked what they were supposed to do now, and Langus explained that the heads of the L-Dragon family would appear to give their congratulations. In the distance, a group of aura-bearing men approached. Catching Zeke's attention, he asked Langus about the stern-looking figure. Langus gasped at Zeke's audacity, but Zeke didn't hold back, calling the family head ugly, though Langus quickly covered his mouth, begging him to remain silent. Despite the struggle, Zeke obeyed, observing the elite L-Dragon forces with curiosity, impressed by the several 6-star warriors, yet noticing the head of the family, Balsa L-Dragon, an 8-star powerhouse commanding immense respect. Zeke remembered that in his era, only a handful of 8-stars existed, and he wondered how many remained now. Turning to Langus, Zeke admitted openly that he disliked Balsa, indifferent to his potential familial ties. Balsa stepped forward, radiating an aura so potent it seemed to crush the air. Speaking few words to urge the students to embody the strength of the Eldragon bloodline, his presence alone caused trembling among the students, all except Zeke, who felt nothing but a raw, inexplicable hatred toward Balsa. As Balsa concluded and departed, another elder took charge, instructing the students that the house expected greatness from them, his blonde hair catching Zeke's attention. The tension from Balsa's presence gradually eased, yet the students still carried the weight of the encounter, trying to regain their composure. The examiner then steps forward, announcing that the next order of business would be the dormitory assignments. Zeke's eyes widen in surprise. As he had assumed all students would be sent to the same quarters, Langus takes a moment to fill him in, explaining that the academy is divided into 4 dorms: East, West, North, and South, and each student is placed into one. Moments later, Zeke hears his name called, and he rises, bidding his friend farewell with a brief exchange of pleasantries before heading off. He discovers he has been assigned to the East Dorm, and is immediately struck by how much the academy has changed over a millennium. Following the directions on a note in his hand, he navigates the sprawling halls, a little anxious that he might have kept his new roommate waiting due to getting lost. When he finally reaches the door, he bursts in with exuberance to announce his arrival and greet his roommate. Yet his excitement falters when he sees who it is. Zeke can hardly believe it. His roommate is none other than Langus, and the instant connection between them is palpable. Langus smiles, agreeing with Zeke and admitting that he had been feeling lonely. Zeke inquires if they have any plans for the day, and Langus explains that they don't. Since training begins the next day, the rest period was strictly enforced. Zeke hadn't been paying attention during the orientation and looks slightly embarrassed, but Langus doesn't think it's something to boast about. Brushing past the minor scolding, he suggests they get some rest. The next day's training looming, initially, Zeke had considered skipping the academy entirely to go on an adventure, but the new sights and experiences of the school sparked his curiosity, prompting him to stay a while longer to explore the world after a millennium. A month passes, and the children undergo rigorous training under the watchful eye of their tutor, learning to master the dragon's breath, a technique created by the 15th head of House Eldragon. The tutor moves among the students, noting those who have already grasped the basics, including Laika, the daughter of the house head. Classified as a second-star talent, yet the tutor's attention keeps returning to Zeke, struggling to comprehend how the boy manages such feats without formal instruction. He wonders if Zeke inherited the family's latent power, while Zeke himself contemplates the evolution of the Dragon King's breath into the current dragon's breath, understanding that the technique channels ether from the environment, circulating it through the body to enhance power. He realizes the effectiveness depends on the user's skill and creativity. And although noble houses preserve their own variations securely, Zeke notes that while the technique is safe and straightforward, it is almost useless when stationary. His original form allowed fluid movement while using ether, a refinement few inherited due to its difficulty. He had simplified it to strengthen the clan, never imagining it would last 1,000 years. Impressed, he wonders how other martial arts might have evolved over time. After training, the students head to the dining hall, exhausted, struggling to eat. While Zeke devours his meal without concern, he notices Langus looking drained and urges him to eat, warning that energy is essential for optimal performance. Langus questions how Zeke remains so energetic while everyone else is fatigued. Zeke teases him, calling him weak and telling him to eat more and push harder. As Zeke lectures, he observes that some of the well-trained students are quietly eating. Then Lika approaches, and not recognizing her, Zeke asks bluntly who she is. Langus nearly chokes, rushing over to whisper in Zeke's ear that she is Laika, the househead's daughter. Zeke innocently admits he had no idea. Langus, flustered and panicked, reminds him they shouldn't even be speaking to her. Zeke merely shrugs, pointing out he too is a son of the head, albeit illegitimate. Both Langus and Laika are stunned, and Lika questions whether he is serious. Zeke calmly confirms he isn't lying. She then asks how he gained the strength to shatter a regeneration stone with his bare hands. Zeke replies nonchalantly that he's just that kind of cool, noticing Langus completely out of his depth. He calls him back to reality, insisting he eat his food. Laika steps closer to Zeke, her expression confident as she leans in, asking if he would consider joining forces with her. Zeke blinks, caught off guard, unsure what she means. Laika clarifies bluntly, urging him to become her subordinate. She explains that as an illegitimate child, allies are essential, and that she intends to use his strength to secure her claim as the next head of the family, promising generous rewards once she achieves the position. Her words are laced with charm and persuasion, yet Zeke remains calm, politely declining her proposal. Lika misinterprets his refusal, assuming he too aims for the family headship, and continues to push, oblivious to his true disinterest. Meanwhile, Zeke observes her quietly, noting her rapid progress toward 2-star status. Impressed by her prowess for her age, he finally speaks. telling her she is free to pursue her ambitions, for he has no interest in family politics. Shocked, Lika intensifies her persistence, pressing Zeke to clarify his goals. Provoked, Zeke slams his knife into the table, releasing a wave of terrifying aura, making it clear he serves no one and desires solitude, asserting that he is already the strongest. Lika reels under the pressure, her confidence shaken. Unable to believe that someone could radiate such sheer force, Zeke continues eating calmly, Langus stepping in to ease the tension. Lika loses her composure entirely, challenging Zeke to a duel. He raises an eyebrow in surprise but remains unshaken. News of the upcoming duel spreads quickly, and soon a crowd gathers at the training grounds, buzzing with anticipation. Langus panics slightly, reminding Zeke of the challenge. Yet Zeke shrugs, claiming he has no real knowledge of Lika. He notices Langus acting more formally than usual and questions him, and Langus explains Lika's lineage, that she carries Typhona blood, a mark of one of the 4 great houses backing Eldrian, and that she has mastered all sword techniques of House Typhona. Zeke listens casually, commenting that knowing so little only makes the situation more thrilling. Langus scolds him, insisting he stands no chance against Lika, questioning why he accepted the challenge. Zeke responds that refusing a duel is not an option. He knows Lika's readiness and poise. Lika, frustrated by his commentary, yells for him to stop talking, planting her sword firmly in the ground, demanding he prepare for a lesson in manners. With that, Langus retreats from the arena, cautioning Zeke to be careful. Alone now, Zeke finally asks why Lika is so determined to fight. She explains her goal, to become head of the family, and that defeating him will secure her claim while forcing him to serve her. Zeke is taken aback, questioning why any of this concerns him. Lika is stunned by his casual demeanor, asking if he's ignorant of the truth about his illegitimate status. She begins to outline the stakes. 5 heirs compete for the headship, Zeke being the only one without blood from the 4 great houses, each aiming to prove themselves in the academy. Lika explains her need for allies to solidify her position, leaving Zeke slightly bewildered but understanding the point. Without hesitation, Lika lunges, determined to land a strike, but Zeke sidesteps easily, her attack cracking the ground. Undeterred, she presses on, swinging frantically with immense power, impressing the onlookers with her skill. Despite wielding a training sword, the crowd cheers, spurring her to increase her intensity. Yet Zeke dances effortlessly around her strikes, forcing Lika into mounting frustration. She questions why she cannot land a hit. Zeke compliments her speed and form, noting she fights better than typical 1-star warriors. Enraged, Lika yells at him to engage instead of talking, and Zeke, obliging, finally counters, evading her strike before delivering a powerful punch to her chest, the impact sending a shockwave through her body, causing her to cough up blood, collapsing to her knees, leaving the spectators in stunned silence. Lika lifts her gaze toward Zeke, frustration etched across her face, demanding why she can't land a single strike on him despite being far superior in theory. Zeke chuckles softly, acknowledging that she is indeed quicker than most 1-star fighters he's faced, yet he coolly reminds her that speed alone doesn't make a true warrior. In his eyes, she's still a mere 1-star. Lika snaps back, pointing out that he too carries a 1-star rank. Zeke smirks, explaining that he can anticipate her every movement, her breathing patterns, the subtle twitch in her muscles. Even a slight flicker of her eyes gives him away. On top of that, he has years of experience over her, delivered with such confident arrogance that it forces Lika to rise from the ground, fury burning in her eyes. She lunges once more, sword in hand, intent on striking him down. Yet Zeke gracefully flips backward, narrowly avoiding her assault. Her open stance now leaves her vulnerable, and without hesitation, Zeke strikes, sending her crashing into the distant wall, dust billowing around the impact, leaving spectators gasping, some unsure if she's even capable of continuing. Langus charges back into the arena, awestruck, cheering for Zeke. Yet Zeke waves him back, reminding him the battle is far from over. He admires her resilience, impressed that she endures despite his overwhelming force. As the dust settles, Lika struggles to her knees, battered and bruised but unbroken. Langus pleads with her to stop before things get worse. Zeke cuts him off, warning that the next phase will be dangerous and that he cannot be held accountable for any injuries. Zeke had suspected it, and now confirms what he sensed. Lika has awakened her 2-star power. She rises, a blazing aura spiraling outward, instantly signaling to everyone that she's entered the 2-star realm, a stage where true source power manifests beyond the body as a tangible aura. Her presence intensifies, and she even thanks Zeke, claiming his challenge pushed her to this new level. Enraged yet exhilarated, she surges forward, sword blazing with a golden aura trail, and Zeke grins, acknowledging her growth in both speed and strength. He toys with her, evading and baiting until, in a fleeting miscalculation, her strike grazes his face, leaving a shallow cut. Lika's eyes light up, sensing his momentary awe, and she seizes the chance to boast about her 2-star capabilities, announcing that he is about to witness the legendary Thunder Spirit Great Sword Arts. Zeke, far from intimidated, feels a rush of excitement, thrilled at the prospect of finally seeing a technique he's never encountered before. Without warning, Lika unleashed her Thunderlight Flash technique *, striking Zeke before he could even react. The sudden burst of lightning left him completely stunned. Wondering how Lika managed to command such power, Zeke couldn't help but mutter that she was out of her mind, yet his smile never faded, which only fueled her irritation. Angered by his unshaken confidence, Lika activated another technique and blasted him again, forcing Zeke to admit to himself that her current strength was overwhelming. His body screamed in pain, and though he was struggling to assess his condition, the audience was mesmerized. No one had expected a 1-star warrior to hold his own against someone like Lika. While analyzing her movements, Zeke noticed that Lika's fighting pattern remained similar, but her advancement to 2 stars had given her a burst of raw, explosive energy. Reluctantly, he admitted she was performing exceptionally well, and her control over lightning was something that warriors a millennium ago could never have achieved. Zeke realized he could strike back, but curiosity got the better of him. He wanted to see Lika's full potential, so he decided to endure the punishment for a bit longer. Lika, fuming at the sight of his grin despite his battered state, resolved to crush his pride completely. She surged forward, moving faster and with deadlier intent than before, landing a devastating blow that sent Zeke crashing into the wall with a thunderous explosion. The crowd gasped as the dust cloud rose. When it cleared, Zeke was still standing, smiling. That sight drove Lika over the edge. She struck him again with a powerful lightning bolt, forcing him down to his knees. Langus rushed forward, pleading for her to stop, but Lika refused, shouting that Zeke was still on his feet. To stop now, she claimed, would insult his pride. She gave him one final offer: surrender and pledge loyalty to her, and she'd show mercy. Zeke remained silent, his pride as a descendant of the L-Dragon burning in his eyes. His silence was all the answer she needed. Enraged, Lika decided to end it once and for all. She summoned her Thunder Spirit Great Sword Art, Heavenly Thunder *, channeling immense energy into her strike. Zeke stood frozen as the lightning consumed him, his scream echoing through the arena. When the assault ended, he fell to the shattered ground, motionless. Believing it was over, Lika thrust her sword into the ground and turned away, only to freeze at the sound of his voice behind her. Zeke was alive, his body now glowing with crackling energy. Lika's eyes widened in disbelief. Zeke was radiating electricity. Even Zeke was bewildered. He admitted that he had no clue what was happening. He'd simply endured her attacks, studying her lightning until somehow it became part of him. Lika found it impossible to believe, but Zeke explained that his Dragon King's breath had reacted with the lightning, merging the energies. The result was that lightning now coursed through his veins, making him stronger. He thanked Lika with a smirk, declaring that her relentless attacks had pushed him to ascend to 2 stars. The battle, he said confidently, wasn't over yet. Lika roared in frustration and swung at him again. But Zeke, now infused with lightning, moved at blinding speed. The surge of power made his muscles and nerves fire like a storm. And though his movements were unstable, he knew he would master it soon. From the sidelines, Langus could barely follow their speed. He realized that Zeke was effortlessly dodging Lika's every strike now. Lika's frustration grew. She demanded to know if he was mocking her. Zeke calmly replied that he wasn't. In fact, he genuinely saw her as a formidable opponent. Desperate, Lika launched a wide-range attack, but Zeke evaded once more. He decided it was time to end things. With a confident grin, he announced that he would create a new technique on the spot, something he hadn't done in ages. Lika froze in confusion, wondering what kind of hidden training he'd undergone. Before she could process his words, Zeke vanished and reappeared before her, unleashing his newly forged technique, Dragon Slaying Arts Tempest of Thunder. A flurry of lightning bolts exploded around them, overwhelming Lika completely. She collapsed to her knees, defeated. As Zeke smiled and declared, "This match is over." Barely able to move, Lika crawled toward her fallen sword, refusing to accept defeat. Her dream of surpassing her brothers and leading her clan felt like it was slipping away. Zeke approached her calmly, telling her that she had been strong, that she'd given him a battle worth remembering. He added that he cherished learning new things, and this fight had been far from a waste of time. With his usual confident smile, he told her that he hoped they'd duel again someday, but Lika could only stare at him, wide-eyed, red cheeks, and unable to comprehend the impossible scene before her. A few hours later, Lika's father, Balsa, was deep inside a dungeon. cutting through hordes of monsters like they were paper. Even the first stage of his dragon combat arts was enough to clear out the entire dungeon effortlessly. He fought with calm precision, showing no hint of fatigue. As he continued his hunt, a messenger rushed into the dungeon, panting as he delivered a report concerning Balsa's daughter. "Sir, Lady Laika has just advanced to 2-star rank," the man announced proudly. Balsa barely reacted. His expression didn't change in the slightest. The messenger tried to emphasize the achievement, explaining how incredible it was for someone her age, that she might even reach 5-star before graduation. But Balsa finally spoke, his tone sharp and cold. "Talent means nothing if it's never tested. Come to me with real news when she's proven her worth in battle." The messenger hesitated, then mentioned that Laika had recently lost a fight. Balsa assumed it was against a senior student, but the man quickly corrected him. The victor was none other than Balsa's illegitimate son, Zeke. That name froze Balsa for a second. He remembered the woman who had borne the boy. She had promise, he muttered, but she was gone long before the child was born. He frowned, wondering how Zeke could have learned such refined techniques without guidance. The messenger added that Zeke had reached 2-star completely on his own, without any master or family support. That piece of news finally stirred something in Balsa. A slow, dangerous grin crossed his face. "Then it's time," he said quietly. "We begin the first trial." The messenger's eyes widened. "But my lord, isn't it too soon?" "Death doesn't care about timing," Balsa interrupted. "Only the strong survive. Anyone who fails the trial is worthless, a burden to be discarded." The messenger had no choice but to obey. Before leaving, Balsa added another order. "Summon Freya. She'll oversee the trial. I want her to observe the boy." The messenger hesitated again. "Freya, sir? Are you sure?" Balsa's eyes gleamed. "Yes. Zeke might finally be worth watching." As the messenger left, Balsa's stern face cracked into a faint smile. For the first time, he was eager to see what his son could truly do. Meanwhile, at the academy training grounds, Zeke and the other students were following their instructor's lessons. But Zeke wasn't copying them. Instead, he was lifting massive boulders nearly 5 times his body weight, calmly practicing his breathing rhythm while the rest focused on dragon's breath exercises. To him, the breathing form they were learning was child's play. Still, he wanted to perfect every detail. His classmate Langus noticed the difference and approached him. "Hey, aren't you going to train with us?" Langus asked curiously. Zeke glanced at him. "Train what exactly?" "The dragon combat arts," Langus replied. Zeke shrugged. "Already mastered it." Langus blinked, thinking he misheard. "You what?" "They just started teaching it an hour ago." Without another word, Zeke dropped the huge rock from his head and told Langus to turn around. Confused, Langus obeyed. Zeke struck him lightly between the shoulders, sending a precise flow of ether through his body. "What you're feeling now is how your ether should flow, balanced and smooth." Langus immediately felt the difference. His energy ran cleaner, steadier than ever before. "Incredible," he whispered, realizing Zeke wasn't bluffing. Zeke, however, didn't look pleased. "You doubted me," he said bluntly. Langus quickly waved his hands. No, I've never had a teacher besides my father. I've always had to figure things out on my own." Zeke's glare softened slightly. Langus then admitted, "You're strong enough to beat Laika already. For you, this training must feel too easy." Zeke shook his head. "Not easy, just structured. Dragon combat arts may be complex, but that's what makes them powerful. It's a form that evolved from generations of warriors, refined with each era." He paused, recalling the new fighting form that had awakened during his battle with Laika, the final form of the technique itself. He wondered how much it had changed since ancient times. Deciding he'd learned enough for now, Zeke turned back to his physical training, but before he could resume, Langus spoke up again. "Zeke, would you train me?" The request surprised him. Langus explained earnestly, "I want to become stronger, no matter how hard it gets." After a moment's silence, Zeke nodded. "Fine, you're teachable. I'll help you." Langus beamed in excitement until another voice joined them from behind. "Then train me too." Both turned to see Laika standing a few paces away, her expression nervous but determined. Her cheeks flushed as she admitted, "You're amazing, Zeke. Losing to you, it shattered my pride, but I want to be stronger. Strong enough to surpass my brothers and even you." Zeke stared at her, silent for a moment, while Laika waited anxiously for his answer. When he didn't respond right away, Laika asked softly if he was truly fine with the situation. "Says Zeke is one of the contender for the Eldragon family's succession too." Langus nodded in agreement. Despite Zeke being an illegitimate child, Balza Eldragon was still his father, making him a rightful heir whether he desired it or not. Zeke finally spoke, saying calmly that he didn't mind. What concerned him more was whether Lika's body had recovered enough for training. From what he observed in their match, her injuries should have taken at least a month to fully heal. Lika quickly shook her head, explaining that she'd already used a healing potion. There was no reason for him to worry. Zeke and Langus exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. Zeke questioned whether such a potion could truly have that level of effectiveness. Langus replied that if Zeke was talking about the standard potion distributed during the entrance exam, it wouldn't have been nearly powerful enough. Since Laika was the family head's daughter, she must have used a far stronger potion reserved for the elite. Zeke sighed in disbelief, muttering that this era's advancements were truly astonishing. Lika admitted that without the potion, she would have been bedridden for weeks. But now what mattered most was her request. She wanted Zeke to train her. She acknowledged that he also needed to focus on his own growth. Yet she wanted to learn under his guidance. Zeke accepted without hesitation, saying he never refused young people who had ambition. Both Laika and Langus were taken aback by his immediate agreement. Lika teased that he was also young like them, and Langus added that they were all nearly the same age. Zeke chuckled and agreed, then asked with a teasing tone if she was truly certain about wanting him as her teacher. After all, he was the one who defeated her. Lika replied firmly that she didn't care about that. If she wished to become the next head of the Eldragon family, she couldn't afford to be selective. She needed strength, no matter the cost. Zeke remembered their first encounter when she declared her dream of leading the family, and he asked why she was so obsessed with that goal. Without hesitation, Lika confessed that if she failed to become the family head, she'd simply be used for political marriage. Her tone turned bitter as she said that in the best-case scenario, she'd be forced to marry one of her cousins. In the worst, a complete stranger. Zeke's expression hardened, anger flashing in his eyes. He asked what she meant by that. Lika explained that because of how precious the Eldragon bloodline was, especially among the 4 family branches, their source power was considered invaluable. That's why the family was fixated on keeping their lineage pure. Langus shivered as a terrifying aura burst from Zeke. His voice grew sharp and cold as he declared that the Eldragon family had truly fallen into vile, disgusting traditions. He clenched his fists and swore he would destroy such meaningless customs. Before the tension could deepen, several instructors arrived, drawing everyone's attention. Lika blinked in confusion, wondering why they were there. While Zeke muttered that their timing couldn't have been worse, he feared they might have overheard him. A woman with blazing red hair stepped forward from behind them. One instructor announced that from today onward, they would have a new instructor, someone prestigious enough to take time from her busy schedule to personally teach them. As the red-haired woman approached, she extended her hand toward Lika and asked if she was Lady Laika. Feeling a surge of danger, Lika instinctively leapt backward. Zeke moved in front of her protectively, while Langus clung to his arm nervously. The woman smiled faintly, praising Lika's sharp instincts and remarking that her aura quality was impressive. Zeke frowned. He hadn't even sensed her presence until now. Langus stammered, asking who she was. The instructor introduced her as Lady Freya, Freya Fwynkick of the Black Dragon Corps. Freya gave a graceful nod and greeted everyone warmly, then turned her sharp gaze toward Zeke. "You must be Lord Zeke, correct?" she asked. When he confirmed, she smiled slightly and asked if he wasn't surprised by her sudden appearance. Zeke replied coolly that nothing she did could surprise him. Freya paused briefly as Zeke's eyes glowed faintly. He remarked that her stealth technique was fascinating. Freya's eyes widened slightly. Now she understood why even the family head, Balza Eldragon, took such interest in this boy. Meanwhile, Zeke analyzed her movements closely, noting how her source power was focused in her lower body, following an unfamiliar flow pattern. No wonder her footsteps made no sound. A spark of intrigue lit up his eyes. He couldn't help but wonder, what kind of martial art did she practice? Freya soon took charge of the class, confirming that she would be their new instructor, causing a wave of shocked whispers to ripple through the students. Lady Freya, known by her title Tempest Wind, was a renowned warrior, one of the most formidable figures in the entire Eldragon family. Another instructor stepped forward and verified that Freya was a 6-star practitioner of the Black Dragon Corps, the elite force that served directly under the family head. The students stared in awe, unable to comprehend why someone of her caliber would personally come to teach them. Freya smiled faintly and said that she would indeed be training them, but only on one condition. They had to pass a simple test. The room erupted in murmurs of surprise. Freya assured them that the test was straightforward. Each of them must obtain a crystal identical to the one she held and survive for 1 full month inside the Poison Dragon Mountain. Langus's face turned pale at the mention of the place, while Zeke felt a pang of nostalgia. He explained that the Poison Dragon Mountain was a treacherous region infested with venomous creatures, where even brushing against a leaf could instantly kill an ordinary human. It was a land of death and danger. In his previous life, Zeke had used that mountain as his personal training ground, but even he thought this test was far too brutal for students their age. Freya began outlining the rules. Every student would receive a single crystal orb, and if it was lost or destroyed, they would be immediately disqualified. When one student nervously asked what would happen to those who failed, Freya replied coldly, they would be expelled from the dragon's nest. She added that they didn't need to worry too much about the poison itself. As long as they properly practiced the dragon's breath technique, their bodies would resist the toxins, however. If they lost control of their breathing or let go of the orb, their chances of survival would plummet. Laika pointed out that the mountain wasn't just filled with poisonous plants. It was crawling with monsters too. Freya's eyes sharpened as she replied that those beasts were their food source. If they couldn't defeat them, they wouldn't last long anyway. Fear spread through the group. One of the students, Retin, muttered that this was impossible. Most of them doubted whether their basic combat art, the strike dragon technique, could even harm such creatures. Freya smirked and told them not to panic. They had 5 days to prepare, during which they could each choose one basic weapon art from the Eldragon family's archive to study. If they managed to grasp it, their chances of surviving would rise. But if not, she would take no responsibility for their deaths. When another student hesitantly asked if she would come to their aid should things get too dangerous, Freya let out a dark chuckle. "This is the dragon's nest," she said coldly, "the heart of the Eldragon family here. The weak perish while the strong endure. If you can't slay a few beasts on your own, then you might as well rest forever beside them in the poisoned embrace." The students froze, trembling under the weight of her words. Sweat trickled down their faces. Langus looked like he was about to cry. While Laika stood silent, deep in thought, Zeke frowned slightly, wondering if this was truly the same Eldragon family he once ruled. Everything felt so unfamiliar. Freya then declared that the briefing was over. She began distributing martial arts manuals for various weapon types, instructing everyone to step forward and pick whichever they wanted to master. As the students crowded around, Langus hesitated, uncertain about what to choose. Zeke advised him to go for a spear art. Reminding him that he'd wielded a spear during the entrance trials, Langus nodded quickly and thanked him. Lika decided to take up a greatsword technique, saying she was already familiar with the lightning greatsword's basic patterns, but Zeke stopped her, suggesting she try axe arts instead. Lika raised an eyebrow and asked why. Zeke explained that it would help her balance her current weaknesses. Since it was Zeke's suggestion, she simply nodded and agreed without argument. Freya looked around and asked if everyone had chosen their manuals. When they confirmed, she told them to make the most of the remaining 5 days, because their lives would depend entirely on how well they mastered those techniques. If they failed, the mountain would claim them without mercy. Just as she was about to leave, Freya suddenly paused and turned back. She reminded them that during the test, their senior group would also be participating, and their mission was to hunt down and steal the orbs from the younger students. Langus's eyes widened in shock as he stammered, asking what she meant. Freya explained that the 10-year-old senior batch would act as hunters, while the new students were their prey. However, since the younger batch greatly outnumbered them and the mountain was vast, there was a chance they could avoid being found if they were careful. But make no mistake, she added coldly, your seniors will come after you with everything they have. With that, Freya turned and walked away. Langus looked terrified, sweat dripping from his brow. What are we supposed to do now? He whispered. We have to deal with monsters and upperclassmen? Lika frowned and said that every senior was at least 1 star level above them. If they gang up on me, I won't stand a chance, she muttered, and most of our classmates won't survive either. Zeke nodded in agreement, saying she had a point. Then form groups of 2 or 3, he suggested. Cooperation isn't against the rules. Watch each other's backs, share food, and defend together. That's your best shot. Langus asked what Zeke planned to do. Zeke smirked slightly. I'll go alone, he said. Might as well enjoy the test. Lika sighed, shaking her head. That sounds exactly like something you'd say. Before training began, Zeke suggested they grab a meal first. As they walked away, Lika leaned toward Langus and whispered, Don't you think Zeke's a bit odd sometimes? Langus shrugged, glancing at her. Yeah, he said, sometimes. 5 days later, the students stood assembled at the foot of the Poison Dragon Mountain, their expressions a mix of dread and determination. Freya stood before them, her crimson hair blazing in the sunlight, a confident smile on her lips. The weather is perfect, she declared, her voice echoing across the field. Let the test begin. Beside Laika, Langus swallowed hard. So, it's finally starting, he murmured. Even though this entire plan had been suggested by Zeke, he couldn't stop doubting himself. Was it really fine for someone like me to be on Lady Laika's team? He thought. There were countless noble-born students in the academy, yet she had chosen him, a commoner who hadn't even awakened his first star. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. Looks like we're in the same boat, Langus. He turned to see Raymond and Celine, both wearing nervous smiles. Celine, hailing from the East Hall of Dragon's Nest, admitted, I still can't believe Lady Laika picked me too. I'm just a commoner. Raymond, also from the East Hall, chuckled as his eyes drifted toward Lika, but Lika shook her head before he could say more. Whether you're noble or commoner doesn't matter to me. I chose you all because I trust your potential and skill. Hearing those words, Langus clenched his spear and took a deep breath. Understood, Lady Laika. I'll do everything I can not to drag the team down. I'll do my best too. Raymond added, nodding firmly. Leah smiled warmly. Good, I'm counting on every one of you. Then her gaze shifted to Zeke. So, you really intend to challenge the trial alone? Zeke smirked. Of course. I've been waiting for this moment. Celine's eyes widened. He's incredible. He's facing Poison Dragon Mountain all by himself, she whispered in awe. Raymond crossed his arms. Well, it's not that surprising. Both Zeke and Lady Laika are descendants of family heads. Confidence runs in their blood. But Laika quickly stopped him. Don't lump me together with him. Even I feel nervous about this. Zeke tilted his head. You? Nervous? You've got one of the strongest teams here. What's there to be afraid of? The others exchanged glances, almost laughing at how casual he sounded. Plenty of reasons, actually, Langus muttered. Lika then asked with a teasing smile. So, Zeke, you really think my team's that strong? Absolutely, Zeke replied without hesitation. Leah's got a sharp eye for talent, he thought to himself. Her group's balance between offense and defense is near perfect. They'll breeze through the trial. You're as overconfident as ever, Langus said with a sweat drop. At that moment, Freya stepped forward again. Is everyone here? She called out. Most students had already formed their teams, chatting quietly among themselves. It was clear that those who hadn't yet mastered their weapon arts had chosen to rely on teamwork. A wise move, considering what awaited them beyond the misty peaks of Poison Dragon Mountain. She then reminded everyone of the rules once again. They had to survive for an entire month within Poison Dragon Mountain while protecting their crystal orbs. The only way to pass was to keep their orbs safe until the end. Each orb looked exactly the same, meaning that if one lost theirs, it could easily be stolen by another participant. A wave of anxiety swept through the students. The realization that stealing was allowed made the atmosphere tense. Zeke, however, understood instantly. This was not just a survival test, but a battle of strategy and strength. Freya continued, explaining that once the new students had entered and settled inside the mountain, the upperclassmen would also be released to hunt them down and steal their orbs. The senior students laughed arrogantly, mocking the newcomers. Most of these kids haven't even reached 1 star, one said. Snatching their orbs will be a piece of cake. Hearing this stirred mixed emotions among the first years, fear, excitement, and unease. Freya concluded her briefing, then raised her hand and declared, "The trial begins now." In an instant, the students rushed toward the misty mountain, determination burning in their eyes. As they disappeared into the fog, Zeke heard Lika's voice behind him. "Make sure you come back alive, Zeke." He smiled lightly. "Don't worry about me. Just make sure you all make it back too. Team, move out," Lika commanded the group, and Zeke gave them one last wave. Freya's voice then called out to him, "Your turn, Zeke." "Right," he replied, giving a small nod. "Sorry, got a little caught up." Freya arched a brow. "Caught up? Aren't you nervous at all?" Zeke grinned calmly. "Not even a little," he said before walking toward the mountain's shadowy entrance. As she watched him go, Freya whispered to herself, "He really is something else." Later that night, in the camp stationed outside Poison Dragon Mountain, one of the instructors turned to Freya with concern. "Do you think the new students will be all right?" Freya tilted her head. "What makes you ask that?" "The test feels too harsh for beginners," he said. Another instructor nodded in agreement. "They've only been in Dragon's Nest for a few months. Most don't even have 1 star yet. No real combat experience." "How many do you think will actually survive?" Freya chuckled softly. "You worry too much. The mountain may be full of poisonous beasts, but most of them are only 1 or 2 star level, barely dangerous enough to kill." Her smile brightened as she added, "They'll be fine." Then, in a quieter tone, she murmured, "Though it won't be long before I release that thing." "What did you say?" one of the instructors asked. Freya simply smiled. "Oh, nothing." She then turned to the others and declared, "It's time for the upperclassmen to begin their phase of the trial." At her signal, the older students charged into the mountain, their weapons gleaming under the moonlight, eyes filled with predatory excitement. Freya watched them vanish into the mist and muttered, "Let's see how many make it out alive. This will be interesting." Meanwhile, deep inside Poison Dragon Mountain, the hunt had begun. One group of upperclassmen spotted their first target, Zeke, standing motionless near the mountain's entrance. "The newbies entered ages ago," one sneered. "What's this idiot doing just standing there?" Another raised his crossbow. "Doesn't matter, I'll end it quick." He fired, the arrow sliced through the air, but before he could hit, Zeke caught it effortlessly between his fingers. The seniors froze. Eyes wide, Zeke looked at the arrow, then snapped it clean in half. "I've been waiting for you," he said calmly. "What the hell does that mean?" One of them shouted. "Who cares?" Another barked. "You saw how fast he was, take him down." But before they could react, Zeke vanished from sight, and in the blink of an eye he was in front of them, his expression sharp with excitement. "Now then, shall we play?"
Opposite side of Dragon Mountain, Celine and her group were engaged in battle against the mountain's amphibious beasts. After Celine cut down a massive frog-like creature, another suddenly leapt at her from behind. Before it could strike, Raymond moved in swiftly, raising his shield to block the attack. With a powerful motion, he slammed his shield forward, knocking the monster to the ground, and then finished it with a clean thrust. Nearby, Langus had managed to defeat his own opponent. Seeing this, Raymond smiled, proud of their progress. Lika praised their teamwork, and both Celine and Reborn thanked her sincerely. However, Langus froze when his eyes landed on the enormous pile of slain monsters surrounding Lika, who stood among them calmly as if the battle had barely begun. Celine couldn't help admiring her. Lika's strength really is something else, Raymond agreed, saying that while they were struggling against a handful of creatures, Lika had already wiped out the majority on her own. Lika merely shrugged. These monsters are just warm-ups. I am a 2-star warrior after all. Besides, all of you have grown since the exam started, especially Celine and Raymond. Both of you have reached 1-star level. Celine gratefully thanked her, and Raymond nodded as well. Langus, however, lowered his gaze. He was the only one still without a star. Seeing this, Celine gently reassured him that his time would come, and Raymond told him to stay patient and keep striving. Their kindness brought a small smile back to Langus's face. Lika then pointed out that he had defeated 3 giant frog monsters on his own, even without a star. She reminded him that before the exam began, he had trained closely under Zeke and had already perfected his spear form. Becoming a 1-star was only a matter of time. Hearing this, Langus felt his chest tighten with emotion. Looking at the darkening sky, Lika said night was approaching and that they should return. Everyone agreed, knowing Poison Dragon Mountain was far more dangerous after sunset. As they moved, Lika suddenly stopped. Langus immediately asked what was wrong, but Lika did not answer. Her expression sharpened as she stared ahead. "What is that student doing near our base?" she said. A figure stepped out from the tall grass with a smirk. Celine and Raymond instantly drew their weapons. Lika recognized him as an upperclassman. When she asked if he had come to steal their crystal, he confirmed it without hesitation. Lika told him that if he had come alone, he had made a terrible mistake. The upperclassman chuckled. "Who said I came alone?" he replied. 3 more upperclassmen appeared behind him, each radiating 1-star energy. Their leader pointed his sword toward them and demanded their crystal orbs. Then he charged at Lika, but she sidestepped effortlessly and ordered her team to hold their defensive formation while she dealt with him. Meanwhile, Langus struggled to defend against his opponent. The upperclassman mocked him, telling him to surrender since the starless student had no chance of winning. Langus faltered, unsure until he recalled a conversation he once had with Zeke. At that time, Langus had asked Zeke if someone weaker could ever defeat a stronger opponent. Zeke answered that if the opponent was a 3-star or 4-star, surrendering would be the only rational choice. But if the enemy was only around 1 star, then the possibility of victory still existed. "How?" Langus had asked. "By finding an opening," Zeke replied. He explained that one could not force an opening against a stronger opponent. One could only endure and wait until the opponent made a mistake. If Langus wanted to defeat someone stronger, he needed patience and confidence in his training. "Don't overthink it," Zeke had said. "When the opening appears, thrust. That's all." In the midst of the clash, Langus steadied his breathing, Zeke's teachings repeating in his mind like a persistent echo. Since he was weaker for now, he had only one option: to endure every strike, to withstand every blow, and wait for the single precious moment when the enemy slipped. The upperclassman attacking him grew more irritated with each passing second. "Just fall already," he snarled, swinging his weapon with increasing force. Another heavy strike came down, fierce and reckless. And there, in that instant of frustration, Langus finally saw it, the opening Zeke had spoken of. Without a trace of hesitation, he shifted his stance, tightened his grip, and thrust his spear forward with all the strength he had accumulated. The tip pierced through his opponent's guard and landed cleanly. The upperclassman gasped, stumbled, and collapsed, consciousness fading instantly. As the enemy hit the ground, a soft, radiant glow appeared on Langus's chest, the unmistakable sign of a newly awakened 1-star. Lika noticed it first. Her eyes widened, but a proud smile quickly followed. He had done it in the middle of real combat, relying solely on his will and training. Meanwhile, the upperclassman leader stared in disbelief. Though he was also a 2-star, he could not understand why Lika's strength seemed overwhelmingly greater than his own. Lika knew the answer. Ever since she had mastered the axe arts technique that Zeke had advised her to learn, her ability to channel force and momentum through her greatsword had increased dramatically. The gap between them was no accident. It was earned. It is simply your misfortune that you chose my team as your target, Lika said, her tone calm but absolute. Golden arcs of lightning flickered around her blade, gathering like a storm about to break. This battle ends here. With a single, devastating strike, she cut through her opponent's guard. The leader dropped to the ground, defeated in an instant. Once she confirmed that every enemy had fallen, Lika returned to her team, asking if everyone was unharmed. After hearing their reassurances, a wave of relief washed over them all. Cheers filled the air, warm and triumphant. They had won their first battle against upperclassmen. Celine and Raymond turned to Langus, congratulating him with bright smiles for reaching 1-star level. Langus returned their smiles, chest swelling with pride that this time he had stood beside them as an equal. Lika looked over her group, her expression soft with pride. Now, at last, every member of her team had awakened their first star. With this, the battles ahead will be far more manageable, she said quietly. But then her gaze drifted toward the deeper regions of the mountain, her expression thoughtful. I wonder how Zeke is doing now. Meanwhile, somewhere else within Poison Dragon Mountain, a lone upperclassman stumbled through the forest, trembling uncontrollably. Tears streaked down his face as he ran, voice breaking into panicked whispers. Please don't come here. Please don't seek.
She trembled in fear, her mind racing as she wondered just what kind of creature that boy named Zeke truly was. Moments later, chaos erupted among the upperclassmen. They scattered in all directions, shouting for help, praying that Zeke wouldn't pursue them any further. Dragging one of the fallen upperclassmen behind him, Zeke advanced slowly, his steps echoing like a predator's approach. The survivors cursed in terror and disbelief, unable to comprehend what sort of monster or demon they were facing. With the massive corpse of a serpent-like beast slung casually over his shoulder, Zeke grinned darkly and asked what the fuss was about, teasing if none of them still wished to play with him. The terrified students called him insane as they fled. Some muttered in disbelief, questioning how a lower-classman had become the hunter, while they, the supposed elites, were being hunted. It was supposed to be the other way around. Then, one of the panicked upperclassmen tripped and tumbled to the ground. As he struggled to rise, he froze. Zeke was already standing before him. His crimson eyes glowed faintly under the dim light. With an almost bored sigh, Zeke told the trembling boy that he was tired of the chase. Extending a hand as if to help, he added coldly that once the boy stood, they would fight. But before Zeke could even react, the upperclassman's eyes rolled back in sheer terror, and he collapsed unconscious. Zeke blinked in confusion, tilting his head. "What's wrong with you people?" he muttered, glancing around. He mocked them aloud, scoffing at how brave they'd been at first, only to end up cowering and running away. His smirk widened as he called after them, shouting for them not to abandon him so soon. Then, a faint presence caught his attention. Turning sharply, Zeke addressed the unseen observer, inviting them to step closer if they were so curious. When no one answered, he chuckled darkly. "If you're just watching," he said, "then I guess I'm not doing anything wrong." With that, his tone hardened. He declared that he would stop holding back and resume his game. From the shadows, a man stepped forward, one of the overseers sent to monitor the examination. Sweat trickled down his face as he watched Zeke, utterly stunned. Not only had Zeke overpowered opponents far above his rank, but he had also detected the overseer's hidden presence. Realizing how extraordinary this boy truly was, the man decided he needed to report everything at once. Meanwhile, outside Poison Dragon Mountain, at the examination camp, Freya listened intently as several observers delivered their reports. It had been a week since the trial began. Nearly a third of the lower-classmen had already dropped out, while the rest were slowly adapting to the toxic wilderness. Freya nodded. That much she had expected. But when she inquired about the upperclassmen, the observers exchanged anxious glances. Her eyes narrowed. "Speak clearly," she demanded. Finally, one of them confessed. "The upperclassmen. They're constantly running." "Running?" Freya repeated, frowning. "From what? There are no beasts in Poison Dragon Mountain capable of threatening them." The observer hesitated, then spoke quietly. "They're not fleeing from a monster. They're fleeing from Lord Zeke." Freya's expression hardened. "From him? Why?" The man took a deep breath before replying. "Because Zeke has been hunting them relentlessly. At first, they tried to resist, but now they can only run." Another observer broke the uneasy silence, his voice trembling as he asked what kind of being Lord Zeke truly was. From what he had witnessed, Zeke seemed almost gleeful, as if the entire ordeal were a game to him. He hunted the upperclassmen mercilessly, cutting them down one after another with a smile that chilled the blood. It was unlike anything the observer had ever seen before. A second observer nodded grimly, agreeing that Zeke was far from ordinary. Even if he was the son of the dragon family head, he possessed an aura that set him apart. Something dark, almost unnatural. To them, Zeke was no longer merely a prodigy. He had transcended that label entirely. He was a monster wearing human skin. Freya listened in silence, her gaze distant, but her voice steady when she finally spoke. She admitted she had harbored her own suspicions about the boy from the beginning. Unlike the others, Zeke had entered the exam alone, completely at ease, as if the dangers of Poison Dragon Mountain meant nothing to him. That, she said, revealed everything. Zeke never intended to avoid the upperclassmen. From the very start, his goal had been to hunt them himself. She recalled the look in his eyes when they first met. Sharp, fearless, and almost predatory. The memory sent a faint chill through her, and she couldn't help but murmur that perhaps the boy truly was a monster. Suddenly, one of the observers frowned and tilted her head. "What is that sound?" she asked. Freya's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "That," she replied softly, "is something I've been waiting for." Then, a man approached her and bowed respectfully. "Lady Freya, where shall we place the cage?" he asked. "Leave it there," Freya instructed, nodding toward an open patch of ground. "You've done well." The observers turned toward the massive cage, and their eyes widened in shock. A low, guttural growl echoed from within, shaking the air. "What in the world is inside that thing?" one of them demanded, while another stammered, asking if Freya truly meant to release such a creature into the mountain. The beast's aura alone was suffocating, unmistakably that of a 3-star monster, far too strong for any of the examinees to handle. But Freya only smiled, her calm unwavering. "Do not be alarmed," she said. "The creature has been conditioned. It will only attack individuals of 2-star strength or higher. The others will not be harmed." Still uneasy, one observer asked, "Why release something like that now, during the examination?" Freya's tone remained composed. "It's a direct order from the family head Lord Balza," she explained. Yet in her mind, she admitted her true motive. She wanted to see for herself what that boy was capable of. The soldiers already whispered of him as a monster. Now she wanted proof. Could Zeke stand against a creature like that? Her decision made, she gave a final command. "Release it at dawn." When morning came, deep within Poison Dragon Mountain, Langus and his team suddenly halted as the earth beneath them began to quake. Leica's eyes narrowed. She muttered that something didn't feel right. Raymond wondered aloud if perhaps the upperclassmen were behind it, but Langus shook his head grimly. "No," he said. "This feels like the work of a beast. A large one, perhaps an enraged Angrabor." Still, Leica couldn't shake the dread creeping up her spine. "No," she said softly, "this is different." Before anyone could respond, another tremor ripped through the ground, stronger this time. A massive tree cracked and toppled toward them. Leica's instincts flared. She shouted for everyone to move. They leapt aside just as the enormous trunk slammed into the earth, scattering debris. As the dust settled, the group turned and froze. Leica's breath caught in her throat. Celine gasped, barely able to speak. What is that?" she whispered. Langus went pale, his entire body trembling. Sweat rolled down his temples as he forced out the words, his voice shaking. "We have to run, now." Before them, half shrouded in the settling dust, loomed a towering figure of stone, a colossal golem, its eyes glowing faintly as it began to move.
On the far side of Poison Dragon Mountain, Zeke sat perched atop a towering pile of fallen monsters and defeated upperclassmen, their bodies scattered in every direction like discarded scraps. He rested one elbow on his knee, staring out over the battlefield with a look that bordered on boredom. The excitement that once thrummed through the examination had nearly evaporated for him. No more challengers dared to step forward, no desperate attempts from upperclassmen to reclaim their pride, and not even a hint of resistance from the supposedly elite participants. He muttered to himself that things had become unbearably dull, almost painfully so. The thrill of combat had faded, leaving behind only silence and stillness. Even the exam observers, who had once watched him closely, had stopped monitoring him entirely, as if they had simply accepted that Zeke would do whatever he pleased. Their absence only reinforced how monotonous the situation had become. Just as he was considering whether to take a nap or hunt something for amusement, a subtle ripple of energy brushed against his senses. It was faint at first, but unmistakable. Originating from the opposite side of Poison Dragon Mountain, Zeke straightened slightly and narrowed his eyes, focusing on that distant presence. He attempted to read the aura, expecting it to be a 2-star beast, something predictable, something ordinary. But the longer he examined it, the more he realized how wrong he was. This aura was heavier, darker, older. It bore the unmistakable weight of a 3-star entity. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. 3-star creatures were never meant to appear inside Poison Dragon Mountain, not during an exam meant for rookies and early-level students. The mountain was dangerous, yes, but regulated. So why was something of that level here? Zeke considered the possibility that the creature had been living deep within the mountain's depths for centuries, perhaps for 1,000 years, hidden away from human interference. His curiosity grew. If that was true, the entire exam could be in chaos. He knew instantly that the other examinees would not be able to handle a monster of that caliber. Even Laika, with all her strength and potential, would struggle desperately against such a creature. The thought made Zeke sigh in mild irritation. The instructors should have cleared the mountain thoroughly before the exam began. Allowing a 3-star monster to roam freely was reckless, even by their standards. But then, another thought crept into his mind. What if Freya and the other instructors had done this on purpose? What if the 3-star creature had been deliberately left behind to test something? Or someone? Perhaps they were experimenting, observing how the candidates would react when faced with overwhelming odds. Zeke shook his head lightly, admitting that he couldn't begin to understand what the instructors were planning. Their decisions were often more chaotic than the monsters themselves. Still, he couldn't deny the truth. This was exactly what he had been waiting for. Something new, something strong, something entertaining. His boredom evaporated almost instantly. However, the presence he sensed was still far away, lingering at the opposite side of the mountain. He wondered for a moment why the creature did not approach him, why it had not already sensed his presence. But sitting around and waiting was never his style. A faint grin tugged at the corner of his lips. "If the 3-star monster won't come to me," he murmured, rising from his seat atop the pile of defeated foes, "then I'll go to it." Turning toward the distant aura, he started moving with confident, unhurried steps. "Wait for me," he said softly, his voice carrying through the wind as he headed toward the creature that would finally break his boredom. Meanwhile, Celine launched a fierce and fully powered strike toward the golem, her weapon cutting through the air with a sharp whistle as it connected with the creature's body. Yet to her astonishment, the attack had absolutely no effect. Not a dent, not a scratch, not even a faint tremor passed through the golem's thick exterior. Celine stepped back in disbelief, her eyes widening as she tried to understand how a blow delivered with all her strength had achieved nothing. Raymond refused to accept the situation without trying. He charged forward and slammed his shield directly into the golem with every ounce of force he possessed. The loud impact echoed across the forest. But just like Celine's attack, his strike failed to produce any reaction from the creature. It did not even shift its footing, and Raymond felt the shock reverberate painfully through his arms. Watching both attacks fail, Lika gathered her aura, allowing electricity to surge around her blade. Lightning crackled violently as she steadied her stance, focusing her power before striking at the golem. This time, a thin scratch appeared on the creature's arm. It was small, almost insignificant, but it was still damage. From this, Lika quickly understood that only someone with 2-star strength could harm the golem at all. Her 1-star companion simply did not have the ability to pierce its hardened shell. Langus immediately called out to her, asking Lady Laika what they should do next. Lika, keeping her eyes fixed on the golem, instructed them to follow her orders closely. After she drew the creature's attention, they were to take advantage of the opening and escape while they still could. Langus reacted instantly, refusing the idea. He insisted they could not abandon Lady Laika and leave her to face such a monstrous opponent alone. Lika turned to them and explained that if they stayed, they would only hinder her. She pointed to the thin scratch she had managed to create and reminded them that even with her aura, the damage she inflicted was minimal. As 1-star fighters, they had no realistic way of injuring the golem. Raymond took a step forward and admitted that while they indeed could not harm the creature directly, they could still be of use. He said that if they worked together to secure every opening, they could ensure every one of Lika's strikes landed effectively. When Laika asked how they intended to help, Langus stepped forward with determination and declared that he would not allow himself to become a burden. Celine nodded in agreement and added that if they supported Lady Laika and created opportunities for her to land her attacks, they might still carve out a chance to win. Their resolve, trust, and unwillingness to abandon her brought a warm smile to Lika's face. She acknowledged their determination and agreed to rely on their support. As Lika gathered lightning and aura into her sword once again, Raymond raised his shield and braced himself. Langus and Celine steadied their weapons, preparing to launch coordinated support attacks. Once Lika felt her power fully condensed within the blade, she commanded them to begin their next assault. Lika rushed ahead toward the golem, her eyes fixed on its shifting movements. The creature reacted immediately, swinging one massive arm toward her. Raymond jumped in front of her and blocked the attack with his shield, but the impact was overwhelming. The sheer force of a 3-star creature's strength caused him to stumble, struggling to stay on his feet. Langus and Celine used the moment to attack the golem from both sides, aiming to disrupt its attention and create an opening. Their blows failed to injure it, but they succeeded in pulling its gaze away from Lika. Using this brief distraction, Lika moved behind the creature, her sword glowing with blinding lightning. She unleashed her greatsword technique, Heaven's Thunder. striking the golem with the full force of her aura and lightning combined. A colossal explosion burst outward, shaking the forest of Poison Dragon Mountain. Trees bent from the shockwave, leaves blew into the air, and light flashed across the surroundings. The golem was knocked to the ground, and when the smoke slowly cleared, the destruction left behind by Lika's technique stretched across the forest floor. Langus hurried over to Lika and asked if she was hurt. Lika replied that she was fine, although the attack had drained every last bit of source power from her body. She then asked about Raymond. With Celine supporting him, Raymond confirmed that he was still standing, though clearly exhausted. Just as Lika suggested they return to their base, her expression shifted. She sensed the golem's presence again, stronger than before. Before the others could react, she shoved Langus out of the way. The golem seized Lika in its massive hand, lifting her effortlessly off the ground. She stared in disbelief as she realized the creature was still alive, still able to move even after receiving her most powerful attack. Selena echoed her shock, unable to understand how the golem could survive such intense damage. Langus, panicked and desperate to rescue her, charged in with his spear. However, the golem swung Lika wildly, using her as a shield to prevent Langus from landing a strike. As Langus grew increasingly frantic, a massive tree suddenly came hurtling through the air, crashing into the golem's body with tremendous force. The impact knocked Lika loose from its grip, allowing Langus to rush to her side and help her stand. Still disoriented, Lika asked what had just happened, confused as to how she escaped the creature's hold. At that moment, a calm voice spoke behind them. Zeke stepped into view, casually asking what kind of situation they were dealing with. Langus and Lika immediately recognized him from his tone alone. Instead of checking on Lika's injuries, Zeke's attention went straight to the creature before them. His eyes glimmered with excitement, and a faint smile formed on his lips as he examined the massive clay figure. With clear fascination, he asked what sort of clay puppet he was looking at. Just moments before Zeke reached the area where he sensed the presence of the golem, a brilliant streak of golden lightning aura flashed across the distant tree line. He instantly recognized that radiance. It belonged to Lika. The realization hit him hard. Lika's group had been the first to clash with the monster. He pushed his weakened body into a full sprint. In his previous life, he would have crossed this distance in the blink of an eye. Now, all he could do was run. Slow, clumsy, powerless compared to the peak he once commanded. The humiliation gnawed at him, making every step feel heavier. As he raced forward, he thought about Lika's team. They were talented youngsters, full of promise. But the creature they faced was a 3-star monster. Even the most gifted novices would struggle to survive against such a threat. He had no idea how long they could possibly endure. A sudden idea struck him with enough force to halt his steps mid-run. He turned to the side and gripped the trunk of an enormous tree. With a grunt, he uprooted it from the ground, soil scattering in all directions. Drawing upon both his physical strength and a technique he had recently learned, he spun and hurled the massive tree toward the monster's location. The giant trunk soared through the air like a titan spear. Zeke watched its flight and allowed himself a thin smile. The result wasn't bad at all. He congratulated himself on learning the technique. It matched his current weakened body perfectly. The technique was called Nurturing Dragon Throwing Arts. It wasn't a flashy or destructive battle skill. Like the manuals for Strike Dragon combat arts, it focused on body movement, channeling source power, and foundational mechanics. Simple instructions, but ideal for someone like Zeke, who in his past life had been a long-range specialist trapped in a melee fighter's body. Even so, he knew hurling a tree wouldn't be enough to defeat a 3-star golem. He resumed running toward the battle. When he finally reached the scene, Langus rushed to him immediately. Disbelief etched across his face. Zeke asked if they were unharmed. Langus confirmed they were still alive, but insisted that their personal condition was irrelevant. Their true problem was the monster in front of them. Zeke's eyes sharpened as he repeated the word golem, so that was its name. He added that something about the creature was fundamentally strange. He could sense its presence, yet found no trace of life force within it. The golem rose again from the rubble like an ancient titan awakening. It lunged at Zeke with brutal speed. Lika shouted a warning, and Langus called out that the creature was incredibly dangerous. But Zeke did not move. He simply raised one hand and caught the golem's colossal fist mid-strike. The impact cracked the earth beneath him, but Zeke remained steady. He commented calmly that the golem's exterior was indeed resilient. Its stone-like body required aura to pierce. Plain physical strength would take far too long. With a single gesture, he shoved the monster's arm aside, musing that defeating it through ordinary means would be unbearably dull. Lika, exhausted and shaken, muttered that Zeke remained reckless as ever. Langus was speechless that Zeke could find such a terrifying monster boring. especially after their group had nearly been crushed to death fighting it. The golem lumbered back into position, preparing another devastating assault. Zeke observed its massive frame, acknowledging that its sheer size made it extremely dangerous. But danger or not, he did not retreat. He lifted his arms and blocked the next blow head-on. The impact roared through the clearing, shaking trees and sending reverberations through the ground. Even while defending, Zeke remained composed. He remarked that the battlefield was too exposed, too unstable. If they stayed here, Lika and the others would be caught in danger again. They needed to move, and Zeke was the only one strong enough to make that happen. Lika's group reacted instantly to Zeke's command. With fear still gripping their hearts, they scrambled away from the battlefield, retreating across broken ground until they were finally at a safe distance. Only when Zeke was certain they were clear did he turn his full attention back to the massive creature. Gathering strength in his legs, Zeke twisted his body and hurled the golem with overwhelming force. The monster crashed through boulders and shattered earth before skidding to a grinding halt. As it struggled to rise, Zeke observed that the creature's outer shell truly possessed remarkable durability. While aura surged around his knuckles, Zeke dashed forward with blistering speed. He wondered aloud whether the golem's interior was as impenetrable as its stone exterior. With a powerful leap, he soared into the air above the creature. Suspended for a heartbeat, he declared that it was time to confirm that question. He unleashed the first form of the Dragon Destruction combat arts, Burst World. His fist collided with the golem in a blinding flash. A thunderous explosion tore through the clearing, shaking the forest like a violent storm. Shards of stone and fragments of the golem's armor blasted outward as the beast's core destabilized. Zeke's reasoning was simple. Rather than chipping away at the monster's defenses piece by piece, Burst World injected concentrated source power directly into its body, shattering it from within. And now that he witnessed the golem's body splitting apart under the force of his technique, he felt a wave of satisfaction wash over him. The plan had worked perfectly. Zeke couldn't help but laugh with exhilaration, admitting that destroying an enemy this way made the battle far more thrilling. 1 month later, Eldrian State Main Building. A month passed after the Poison Dragon Mountain exam, and Zeke found himself walking through the marble halls of the Eldrian State's central estate, irritation written plainly across his face. His training had been interrupted by a sudden summons, and he demanded to know why. The explanation was simple. The exam had officially concluded, and despite the unexpected 3-star golem attack, there were no further tragedies. Even so, the brutal environment had taken its toll. Only 30% of the 7-year-old examinees had survived to the end. But because they faced constant peril, every surviving student had met the standards and advanced to 1-star level. Now that the exam was over, Zeke had been summoned directly by Balza Eldrion, the head of the Eldrion family. As Zeke and Freya walked through a long corridor lined with ancient tapestries, he asked her bluntly what the family had wanted. Freya winced at his choice of words. She insisted that he refer to Balza as Master Head, not simply Head. Zeke argued that the two were practically the same, but Freya stubbornly disagreed. To Freya, the reason for the summons was painfully obvious. Even so, she spelled it out. Zeke had been called because of his behavior during the exam, behavior that was so disruptive it forced the entire family leadership to take notice. When Zeke asked whether his actions were truly the cause, Freya answered without hesitation. The purpose of the upperclassmen exam was straightforward. Upperclassmen were supposed to ambush lowerclassmen and steal their crystal orbs, but Zeke, a lowerclassman, had flipped the entire system upside down. Instead of being hunted, he hunted them. Freya explained that because Zeke attacked and overwhelmed every upperclassman he encountered, not a single one succeeded in stealing even a single orb. As a result, all upperclassmen had been forced to retake the exam, an unprecedented humiliation that stunned the academy. Zeke defended himself, stating that the rules never forbade lowerclassmen from retaliating. Freya agreed, but added that the possibility had simply never crossed anyone's mind. No lowerclassman was ever bold or insane enough to strike first. Freya could only sigh as she glanced back at him. His attitude, she said, needed serious improvement before he faced the Master Head. His rebellious nature, his arrogance, and his complete disregard for hierarchy had brought him nothing but trouble. Before entering, Freya again reminded Zeke, almost pleaded with him really, to correct his attitude and mind his tone when speaking before the Masterhead. She stressed this particularly as they approached Balsa's office. Zeke, however, responded with his usual indifference, asking why he needed to change anything at all. Freya, exasperated, warned him that although he was still young, such a reckless and disrespectful manner could easily cost him his life. She confessed that she had no desire to witness him being executed by his own father, simply because he could not control his behavior. Zeke merely shrugged and remarked that if his father truly resorted to such extremes, then perhaps Balsa was more brutal than the rumors claimed. When they reached the imposing door, Freya wasted no time. She knocked firmly, then introduced herself with a rigid formality. Black Dragon Corps member Freya Wink. reporting with Zeke as per the Masterhead's summons. From inside, Balsa's deep, authoritative voice replied, commanding them to enter. As they stepped into the room, Freya immediately reiterated that she had brought Zeke in accordance with his orders. Balsa finished the last stroke of his writing, lifted his head, and fixed Zeke with a stern, unreadable gaze. Then, in a cold and solemn tone, he asked why Zeke had assaulted an upperclassman during the examination. Zeke paused, as though tired of the entire subject, and replied that everyone had been pestering him with the same pointless questions. Instead of answering, he countered by asking if he was forbidden from attacking the upperclassmen during the test. Balsa narrowed his eyes slightly and asked what Zeke meant by that. Zeke then explained himself clearly. The only stated requirement for passing the test was to survive for 1 month in Poison Dragon Mountain and safeguard their crystal orb. Other than those conditions, no rules or restrictions had been disclosed. Therefore, he simply acted according to the freedom allowed, using his time and his strength however he pleased. If certain actions were prohibited, he argued, those rules should have been made explicit before the trial began. As Zeke spoke, Freya felt her heart freeze in terror. She immediately shouted at him, horrified at his audacity. She demanded to know why he was saying such reckless things in front of the Masterhead. But before she could finish, Balsa's eyes narrowed dangerously, and a crushing dragon aura erupted from him. The force was overwhelming. Freya collapsed to her knees at once, trembling under the suffocating pressure. She fully believed that if this continued, Zeke would be killed on the spot. Yet, to her utter disbelief, Zeke remained standing. Not only standing, completely unaffected. It was as though Balsa's immense aura was nothing more than a breeze brushing past him. Annoyed, Zeke lifted his head slightly and told Balsa to stop trying to intimidate him, calling it extremely irritating. Shock and irritation darkened Balsa's face. Freya could hardly even breathe. While she was still kneeling, Zeke asked bluntly if Balsa had summoned him solely to interrogate him about such trivial matters. Balsa, regaining composure, demanded to know how Zeke had accomplished what the reports described. According to the exam logs, Zeke had not only subdued an upperclassman, but had even defeated a 3-star golem, an achievement impossible for someone of his age and supposed rank. And now, even after being subjected to the Masterhead's full aura, he remained calm and steady. His voice sharpened as he questioned Zeke. How did a child born out of wedlock obtain such unfathomable power? Zeke stared back without flinching. He asked whether Balsa truly wished to know the reason behind his strength. Then, with complete confidence, he answered, "It's simple. I am Zeke." Balsa's brows tightened in frustration, but Zeke held his ground, his eyes gleaming with a quiet, unwavering arrogance that made even the Masterhead momentarily speechless. After a long, tense silence in which father and son simply stared at one another, Balsa finally exhaled and spoke. He remarked that Zeke's temperament truly was every bit as dreadful as the report suggested. Even so, his achievement could not be ignored. Regardless of Zeke's insolence, he had still defeated a 3-star golem, an accomplishment worthy of reward. In a calm yet imposing voice, Balsa informed him that he would be granted a choice. He could either claim one item from the Dragon Treasury, or he could be given access to the 2nd floor of the Dragon Hall. The announcement left Freya quietly stunned. She could not fathom why Master Balsa, despite Zeke's outrageous behavior, was actually rewarding him. In her mind, she reviewed the significance of the two places. The Dragon Hall and the Dragon Treasury were not ordinary repositories. They were sacred vaults that had safeguarded the Laragan family's greatest legacies for over a millennium, ever since the age of the founding patriarch, Gilfas Laragan. The Dragon Hall stored countless manuscripts and ancient tomes, including techniques that were now banned due to their danger. Meanwhile, the Dragon Treasury housed the preserved relics of previous family heads, legendary weapons, rare spirit medicines, ancient artifacts, and other priceless treasures from earlier eras. Both facilities contained secrets so valuable that their entrances were guarded relentlessly, and only a handful of individuals had ever been granted entry. To access even the 2nd floor of the Dragon Hall required truly exceptional merit. And yet, Balsa was offering this privilege to Zeke, despite the disrespect he had shown moments earlier. Freya could hardly believe it. Zeke, however, showed not even the slightest satisfaction. Instead, he casually remarked that if Balsa intended to reward him, then there was no reason to be stingy. Why? He asked. Could he not simply receive both, access to the Dragon Hall and an item from the Dragon Treasury? Balsa's expression tightened, and he stated firmly that Zeke could choose only one. With that, he dismissed them, telling them they could go. But Zeke wasn't finished. He raised a finger and pointed directly at his father, incredulous that the discussion was ending so abruptly. He declared that he still had plenty he wanted to say. Freya nearly exploded. She grabbed Zeke by the collar, forcing a bright, respectful smile toward Balsa as she apologized and expressed gratitude for the honor bestowed upon Zeke. She assured the master head that she understood his instructions perfectly. Then she turned sharply and began dragging Zeke away before he could provoke a catastrophe. Yet, even as he was hauled toward the exit, Zeke spoke again. He said he had one final message for Balsa. Without hesitation, he stated that if Balsa continued suppressing his own emotions as rigidly as he did, he would never become stronger, no matter how hard he tried or what techniques he mastered. The words struck Balsa like a blow. Shocked and infuriated, he surged with power, releasing his dragon aura once more. But the moment it erupted, it was instantly suppressed. Crushed effortlessly beneath the presence of Zeke's own divine dragon aura, Freya shook violently as she whispered for Zeke to be quiet, desperate to escape before disaster unfolded. She dragged him through the doorway and slammed it shut behind them. Left alone in the silent chamber, Balsa stared at the empty space where Zeke had stood. His mind churned, unsettled. For the first time, he wondered, what exactly was the presence he had just felt emanating from the child he had once dismissed as insignificant? As soon as Freya and Zeke exited the main hall, Freya's patience shattered. She rounded on him, her voice echoing through the corridor as she demanded to know what had possessed him. How could he speak so insolently to the masterhead after all her warnings? Had he ignored every single word she said before they stepped into Balsa's chamber? Zeke looked genuinely confused. He asked what she meant, claiming that he had tried his best to restrain himself and behave properly in front of Balsa, words that almost made Freya collapse. She stared at him incredulously and asked whether that was what he called restraint. How could he speak so politely to the instructors, or even to her, yet show nothing but disrespect toward the head of their entire family? Zeke merely shrugged and replied that Balsa was his father. Naturally, he spoke to him differently. Freya had no answer. With his overwhelming abilities and strange temperament, she muttered that he was clearly not an ordinary child. Eventually, unable to hold back her curiosity, she asked who he really was. Zeke blinked and responded in his usual calm tone that he had told her countless times already. He was Zeke. Nothing more, nothing less. Freya could only stand there speechless. Inwardly, she replayed what she knew. Every child of the Laragan lineage had been fed ancient dragon blood as infants. Even so, none of them, not one, could stand against the Masterhead's aura. Balsa possessed the might of a Dragon King, a superior race among ancient dragons. Even Zeke should have been crushed under that pressure, yet he remained unmoved. What kind of existence could remain so calm before the Dragon King himself? As Freya wrestled with that thought, Zeke noticed her silence and casually asked if something was wrong. She quickly denied it, though inwardly she had already decided that Zeke's birth records must be investigated thoroughly. Changing the subject, she asked which reward Zeke intended to choose. Again, she explained his options. Access to the Dragon Hall's second floor, or one treasure from the Dragon Treasury. Only one. Zeke asked if he could have both. Freya immediately said no. Left with no choice, he picked the Dragon Hall, reasoning that knowledge was more important to him right now. He needed to understand the era he had reincarnated into, its medicines, its tools, its advancements of the past 1,000 years. Just then, Langus arrived, nearly stumbling from excitement. He could not believe they were actually being granted entry into the Dragon Hall of the Elvergon family. When Zeke asked whether he was happy, Langus nodded vigorously. The techniques he already knew, strike dragon combat arts and nurturing dragon spear arts, were formidable, yet now he would get the chance to learn even higher-level martial arts. For him, it felt like a dream. Moments later, Lika rushed in, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm. She wondered how much she could absorb before the time limit ended and vowed to give her all while reading. When Zeke asked whether there was a time limit, Lika confirmed it. Although they could only enter the first floor, the rules followed those of the higher floors. Each person could borrow one book, but could read any number inside as long as time remained. Efficient time management would be essential. Zeke responded with a simple, uninterested, "I see." Lika then told him she'd heard he was allowed to choose between the hall and the treasury, and asked why he picked the hall. Given his personality, she expected him to choose the treasure vault. Zeke admitted the same thought had crossed his mind, but right now, knowledge held more value. Lika explained that the second floor held much rarer books, especially concerning martial arts, and the quality difference between floors was enormous. Still, she insisted nothing surpassed her lightning greatsword technique. Zeke didn't reply. His gaze had drifted toward the towering structure ahead, the Dragon Hall. Lika waved her hand in front of him, asking whether he was even listening. Once they arrived, the Guardian announced their allotted time, 5 hours. He advised them to use their time wisely and maintain silence inside. Zeke wondered whether 5 hours were sufficient, but Lika assured him that most people received far less, 2 or 3 hours at most. She instructed that the first step was choosing which book they wanted to borrow. The rest of their time should be spent devouring as many texts as possible. Langus added that he'd heard rumors of geniuses could read multiple books at once. His own goal, however, was simply to find a martial art that suited him. When they stepped inside the Dragon Hall, Zeke observed that finding the right book might be more difficult than expected. Langus and Celine, meanwhile, stared around in awe. Overwhelmed at being inside the mythical archive they had only heard stories about, Zeke scanned the endless rows of ancient manuscripts and scrolls. There were far more than he had anticipated. A slow smile spread across his face. Perhaps, hidden within these halls, he would find knowledge that even he had never encountered before. Inside the Dragon Hall, Zeke sat surrounded by mountains of ancient manuscripts and scrolls, the sheer weight of history pressing in on him from every side. The hall was silent except for the faint rustling of pages as he devoured one book after another. Each text revealed secrets of a past he had never imagined, rifts tearing open reality, an alien world of chaos, and powers that defied everything he previously understood. At first, he read with sharp focus, then fascination crept into his eyes, and finally, disbelief. After several hours, even Zeke's endurance faltered. He leaned back, exhaling a long breath, letting the enormity of the knowledge sink into him. 1,000 years, he murmured under his breath, though no one was there to hear. 1,000 years of history lost to him. 1,000 years of evolution, conflict, and catastrophe. He shut the most recent book with a thud and rubbed his temples. To think that nearly 900 years ago, this world had connected to a place known only as the Chaos Realm. According to the surviving records, a tear had opened within the dimensional wall, transforming the fate of humanity forever. Creatures of chaos poured through, and with them came destruction the world had never witnessed before. In response, the people of this world awakened a special source power within themselves. Strength born from necessity, forged in the fires of war. The Eldragon family, the family Zeke had been reborn into, fought at the forefront of this battle. Thousands perished. Empires were reshaped. And amidst that turmoil, 4 legendary warriors from the Chaos Realm Tefona, Lavius, Bahamut, and Fafnir joined forces with the Eldragons. Their bloodlines merged, giving rise to the 4 great Eldragon branches that still existed today. As he read those names, Zeke's expression shifted. Pieces began falling into place. Pieces he'd ignored before. He recalled the black boar he had encountered earlier, the creature enveloped in an eerie, unnatural black mist that defied all natural laws he knew. At the time, it had felt wrong, foreign. Now after reading these records, he finally understood why. That aura, it didn't originate from this world, Zeke thought. The black mist wasn't elemental, it was chaos itself. He also remembered Laika's lightning aura, strange, unstable, holding a resonance unlike any martial or spiritual technique he had ever seen. Even that now made sense. No wonder everything felt unfamiliar. Their power came from beyond this world. A thrill of anticipation sparked in his chest. The world he thought he understood had just become far more dangerous and far more interesting. But what fascinated Zeke more than anything was the mention of magic. A new form of technology and power brought from the Chaos Realm. Not source power, not martial energy, not dragon techniques. Magic. A system entirely separate from what this world had previously known. Zeke immediately searched for the instructional tomes, wanting to understand how this form of power worked. Zeke frowned at the empty space on the shelf. Normally, something this important would be placed right beside the history books. So where is it? Why isn't it here? But before he could continue reading, a sudden whisper drifted through the silent hall. Be quiet. Zeke stiffened. There was no presence nearby. No aura, no footsteps, not even a flicker of source power. Just a voice. He turned sharply, searching the silent aisles, but found nothing. As he sat among the open books, he muttered to himself that he sensed no power besides ordinary source power. If this was a form of magic, it was completely unlike anything he knew. Then another oddity occurred. A single book near him began flipping its pages on its own. A moment later, every book stacked beside him rose into the air, gently floating toward the upper railing as if pulled by an unseen force. Zeke's eyes widened. This was no normal phenomenon. Thin, shimmering threads caught his attention, barely visible, glistening in the air. Someone was manipulating the books using thread-like wires. To Zeke, the technique was so intriguing that he momentarily forgot his surroundings. When the voice repeated its warning to remain silent, he ignored it. He snatched the last book from the air and declared loudly that he refused to stay quiet in front of something so interesting. He tugged on the book, insisting that it show him the direction the others had gone, following the line of the invisible threads. High above on a balcony, a hooded man sat casually on a chair, a large bag beside him. His fingers twitched rhythmically, controlling dozens of floating books with an elegant thread technique. Without looking down, he flicked his wrist. Zeke suddenly felt cold wires wrap around him. Before he understood what had happened, the Dragon Hall Guardian's voice boomed through the chamber. Time is up. All visitors must exit immediately. With a fluid motion, the hooded man sent a ripple through the threads, and Zeke was flung bodily out of the building. He twisted in the air, stabilized himself, and landed on his feet with perfect control. He stared back at the Dragon Hall, more fascinated than annoyed. Another technique he had never seen. Another mystery waiting to be uncovered. He angrily shouted toward the tall structure. Show the books properly. He still have more to learn. Behind him, Laika and Lengus looked as though they had forgotten how to breathe. Lengus hurried forward, confused. Zeke, what happened in there? Why were you thrown out like that? Laika also stepped closer, frowning. Why did they eject you with so much force? Zeke casually brushed dust from his clothes. He simply replied that he had gotten a bit too excited. Lengus and Laika exchanged helpless looks, unsure how that explained anything. To change the topic, Zeke asked what each of them had gained from their time inside. Lengus brightened and displayed a book titled Cloudwater Spear Arts, explaining that he had learned a movement technique within its pages. Celine lifted her book, White Flower Sword Arts, and reported that she, too, had learned a movement technique. Raymond presented Eldragon Guardian Shield Art, explaining that it complemented the defensive martial art he had studied earlier. Zeke nodded approvingly, even as he noted inwardly that all three techniques originated from martial arts he himself had created in his previous life. Then he turned toward Lika. What about you? He asked. Laika held up a thick book titled Heavy Wave Great Sword Art. She explained that the original technique was created by the first patriarch, but the perfected version came from the 15th family head. Since she already possessed her family's hereditary martial art, she intended to study this one purely for research. At the mention of the 15th head, Zeke's expression subtly changed. Dragon's Breath, Strike Dragon Combat Arts, and now Heavy Wave, Great Sword Art, all bore the fingerprints of the same individual who had repeatedly refined Zeke's own creations. It was both amusing and intriguing. He looked back toward the massive Dragon Hall, his eyes gleaming with excitement. When he had first entered, he thought the place might be dull. Now he could hardly wait to return. There were still countless secrets hidden inside, techniques, histories, and mysteries he had yet to unravel. 5 years had passed since the events that changed their lives. Inside one of Eldragon Academy's vast marble halls, Laika moved quickly, her eyes scanning every corner as she searched for familiar faces. She had already checked the dorms, classrooms, and even the library, but there was still no sign of Zeke or the rest of the team. Just then, a voice called from behind. She turned to see a younger student catching his breath. If you're searching for Lord Zeke and the others, they went to the training grounds. Lika's expression flickered in shock. Second time, they had already trained before sunrise. Why would they return again? She thanked him briefly and hurried toward the training grounds, unease tugging at her chest. The moment she stepped through the gate, she froze. Before her, Selena stood with her sword drawn. Beside her, Raymond held a towering shield, his stance firm and ready to absorb any blow. Behind them, Lengus spun his spear with refined precision, and at the center of all three stood Zeke. His posture was relaxed, but his presence dominated the battlefield. No armor, no weapon raised, only a sharp, unwavering gaze that told anyone watching that he feared nothing in front of him. It was clear he intended to face all three alone. The scene shifted to the office of Balza Eldragon. Seated behind an imposing desk carved from ancient dragonwood, Balza silently reviewed a stack of documents. The room was heavy with authority, its walls lined with relics and maps from past campaigns. After a long moment, he set the papers down and lifted his gaze. He asked calmly whether the information had been fully verified. Standing before him was Ayn, captain of the Black Dragon Corps. His posture was rigid, his expression devoid of emotion. Ayn reported that their investigation had confirmed the emergence of a special rift. Based on preliminary spatial analysis and mana readings, there was an estimated 80% probability that a magic tower existed within it. Balza exhaled slowly through his nose. Of all possible locations, it had appeared in the most troublesome place imaginable, magic water, a substance capable of transforming ordinary humans into mages. Those who drank it gained a rare constitution that allowed them to convert source power into an entirely different force, mana. From mana were born new techniques, new schools of combat, and entirely new forms of warfare. Civilization itself had been reshaped by its discovery, but with that revelation came endless bloodshed. Territorial wars erupted over the source of magic water, magic springs. In this age, the number of mages a house possessed was no longer a matter of prestige. It was the foundation of military dominance. A house with abundant mages could overwhelm others regardless of tradition or lineage. And yet, within Eldragon territory, there was not a single magic spring. For a house without ownership of a spring, there was only one way to obtain magic water: conquering special rifts and claiming what lay within by force. At present, the Eldragon family possessed only a handful of mages, Balza among them. Every one of them was a hardened veteran, someone who had survived the brutal trials of Special Rift conquest. Even so, their numbers were painfully few. Compared to the other great houses that controlled Magic Springs, Eldragon was being steadily pushed into a corner by sheer numerical disadvantage. That was why Special Rift Conquest had become Eldragon's highest priority mission, one that could not be ignored or delayed. Ian then raised another issue. Just as the family head had anticipated, the Rift's location complicated matters significantly. It had appeared within the abundant Dragon Forest. Only days earlier, a minor armed clash had already broken out in the surrounding region, an ominous sign of what was to come. The abundant Dragon Forest was a vast, ancient woodland that lay mostly within Eldragon territory. However, part of its expanse crossed into the lands of another great house. That house, the one aggressively asserting ownership and brazenly referring to the region as the Great Abandoned Forest, was the Kerberos family. Captain Ein unfolded a detailed map across the desk, its surface etched with layered terrain markings, mana flow lines, and distorted spatial readings. With a precise motion, he indicated the glowing point at the center. He explained that the rift itself was unquestionably located within Eldragon territory. However, due to its immense scale and highly unstable nature, the spatial domain generated around it was far from contained. The influence of the rift was likely to spread outward, potentially overlapping into neighboring lands. Ian traced the outer boundary with his finger and pointed toward the marked region belonging to the Kerberos family. He warned that, considering the temperament of those mongrels, there was an extremely high probability that Kerberos forces would swarm the area the moment they sensed the rift's presence. Whether driven by greed, ambition, or sheer provocation, they would not hesitate to interfere. Balza's expression remained cold and unmoved. He remarked that making noise was the only thing the Kerberos family had ever truly excelled at. Still, he did not dismiss the threat. He acknowledged that sooner or later, they would inevitably discover the rift's existence. And when they did, conflict would be unavoidable. Balza continued, stating that because the phenomenon was a spatial rift, any forces entering its domain would face severe restrictions. Movement, deployment, and coordination would all be limited by the warped environment within. In such a battlefield, numbers alone would not guarantee victory. Even so, Balza slowly lifted his head, his gaze sharpening with resolve. Waiting was not an option. If Eldragon hesitated, Kerberos would seize the initiative, and Eldragon would be forced to react from a disadvantage. They had to act before Kerberos caught on. Without a moment's pause, Balza issued his command. All dragon nests under Eldragon's authority were to be notified immediately. Preparations were to begin at once. A selection examination would be held to choose those worthy of entering the rift. This would not be a mere test of strength. It would be a test of survival. Captain Ein responded with a sharp nod. His expression did not change, but the weight of the order was clear. The scene shifted to the training grounds, where Leica stood facing Zeke. Her expression was unusually serious as she asked whether he was truly prepared to go all out. Zeke stood relaxed before her, a faint smile resting on his lips. He answered with calm confidence, as though nothing in the world could possibly unsettle him. Without any warning, Lengus, Selena, and Raymond moved at once. Their auras flared violently as they attacked from different directions, each strike carrying full intent. The instant their powers surged, Zeke's gaze sharpened. He stepped forward, his movements fluid and precise, blocking, deflecting, and redirecting every blow. Spears, blades, and shield strikes were stopped as if they weighed nothing at all. Their combined assault ended before it could even begin. Zeke lowered his arms and calmly began critiquing them. He told Lengus that he was forcing too much strength into his spear, disrupting the natural flow of his spear arts. Turning to Selena, he remarked that while her speed and number of strikes were impressive, her attacks lacked weight, advising her to find a proper balance. As for Raymond, Zeke acknowledged that his shield control was solid and improving. Then, with a light smile, Zeke added that all of them were still far too passive. He told them they needed to grow accustomed to attacking without hesitation, and invited them to come at him again. Watching from behind, Leica muttered under her breath that this entire scene was insane. Zeke glanced at her and asked if she truly thought so. Leica replied sharply that allowing oneself to be struck bare-bodied, without using source power, was absolute madness. Meanwhile, Zeke continued to slip effortlessly through their renewed attacks, dodging and countering with ease. He responded that this was exactly what proper training looked like. Raising his arm confidently, he remarked that his body itself had grown sturdy enough even without source power, asking if she truly could not see that. Leica sighed deeply and placed a hand on her forehead, telling him that at the very least he should have them stop attacking while they were talking. Even as they continued striking him, Lengus muttered that Zeke was seriously insane. Leica shook her head and said that, in her opinion, all of them were just as strange, continuing to attack him as though their blows were not completely meaningless. Raymond, still pressing forward, questioned how Zeke could possibly possess such defense without using source power. Selena added that it went far beyond what should be possible for the human body. Leica cut them off, telling them not to lump Zeke in with humans at all. She reminded them of what the seniors used to call him, the demon child of the Eastern Hall. Zeke glanced at her with mild offense and asked if that was not, in fact, an insult. As the training continued, Zeke asked Leica whether she had come merely to watch, or if she planned to join them. Leica replied that training was fine, but there was something important she needed to tell him first. She informed him that it appeared they would soon be encountering children from other dragon nests, and likely very soon. Langus froze in shock. Raymond admitted that he had expected something like this to happen eventually. Selena asked if it was related to the next test. Leica said she did not know the details, but the signs were obvious. Zeke asked where she had even picked up such rumors. She replied that she had noticed it through the instructor's behavior, their conversations, movements, and sudden changes in attitude. Zeke thought briefly about the instructors and realized he had never paid attention to such things before. With a serious expression, Leica warned him to be careful. She mentioned that the Western Hall had another candidate for the next family head, someone dangerous. Zeke's smile widened slightly. He remarked that things were finally starting to sound interesting. A few days later, the training grounds were packed with students from the Eastern Hall. Juniors stood nervously, struggling under the oppressive atmosphere, while seniors remained calm and imposing, their presence alone overwhelming the weaker students. Zeke and his group stood together, quietly observing. Zeke noted that everyone had been gathered into the arena without regard for rank. Leica nodded, saying it was exactly what she had expected. Suddenly, the gates of the training grounds swung open. All chatter died instantly as Freya stepped inside. Her sharp voice cut through the air, ordering everyone to remain silent. Every student turned toward her. Freya announced that in 3 days' time, they would be facing the children of the other dragon nests. Shock rippled through the crowd. Panic spread among the juniors. Raymond frowned deeply. Selena fell silent. Leica stood motionless, her expression firm with determination, while Angus stiffened, clearly unsettled, and Zeke smiled. For the first time in a long while, he felt genuinely excited. Freya stepped forward and held 3 fingers out in front of her, her voice echoing clearly across the training grounds. She announced that in exactly 3 days, every student present would be facing the children of the other dragon nests. The moment her words settled in, shock rippled through the crowd. Battles between dragon nests were no small matter. Such clashes were traditionally held only during graduation examinations, when students had already proven themselves. To announce one so abruptly left many students stunned, unable to grasp why it was happening now. Freya allowed the confusion to linger for a moment before continuing. She stated calmly that there was a reason behind this decision, but made it clear that she could not reveal all the details. However, she promised them one thing with certainty. Those who won this tournament would be entrusted with a special mission. At those words, Zeke's eyes gleamed faintly. He did not ask what the mission was. He did not need to. Anything described as special in this academy inevitably involved danger, combat, and growth. To him, it sounded far too interesting to ignore. Freya continued, explaining the structure of the event. The tournament would follow an elimination format, with 7 students selected from each of the 4 dragon nests. Victory would come not through teams, but through individual strengths. The Eastern Nest, she emphasized, would need to decide its 7 representatives today. A senior student stepped forward, his voice confident as he asked whether the 7 representatives would naturally be chosen from among the senior class. Freya answered calmly, asking him in return why he thought she had summoned every student, regardless of grade. Her implication was clear. The representatives would be chosen from all years, seniors and juniors alike. That answer immediately stirred unrest. Several senior students scoffed openly. They questioned what juniors could possibly contribute in a battle of this scale. Their dismissive gazes pressed down on the younger students, many of whom stiffened or trembled under the pressure. The seniors continued, asserting that only they were capable of fighting other dragon nests. To them, the juniors were nothing more than weaklings who would become liabilities in real combat. Before the argument could escalate further, Freya spoke again. This time, her expression shifted, almost casual, even cartoonishly light. She stated that none of that mattered. Whether senior or junior, strong or weak, 7 students would be chosen today. Complaints would not change that fact. As Freya stepped away from the center of the training grounds, a senior student strode forward with clear authority. It was Rick, one of the strongest seniors of the Eastern Nest. He turned toward the gathered juniors, his voice sharp as he declared that the 7 representatives for the tournament would naturally be chosen from among the seniors. With an arrogant sweep of his gaze, he asked if anyone had any objections. For a brief moment, silence followed. Then a single figure stepped forward from the junior ranks. It was Leica. She stated calmly that she did, in fact, have a complaint. According to her, there was no reason the 7 participants should be limited to seniors alone. She added that juniors, herself included, were more than qualified to compete. Rick's jaw tightened as he muttered her name under his breath. Regaining his composure, he replied coolly that Lady Laika must be misunderstanding the situation. This was not a matter of noble lineage or status, he said, but one of pure combat skill. In a head-to-head battle, experience and strength mattered above all else. Before Rick could finish his sentence, Laika released her mana. The air shifted. 3 brilliant stars manifested on her chest, shining unmistakably. Laika calmly asked whether someone with 3 stars still lacked the necessary skill. The seniors stared in disbelief. Rick's eyes widened slightly, his confidence cracking. Someone among the seniors muttered under their breath, questioning when a 3-star junior had even appeared. Then she continued, stating that she agreed participants should be chosen by strength, but asked a simple question in return. Were there truly 7 seniors stronger than her? She demanded an answer. And if there were not, she argued, then the selection must include freshmen as well. Rick clenched his teeth and responded that Laika was an exception, a special case. He raised his voice, insisting that no other junior could ever surpass the seniors. That was when another voice cut in, who remarked casually that Rick was being far too loud. Rick turned sharply, irritated, asking what did he say. It was Zeke, who replied calmly, repeating that Rick was shouting unnecessarily. Then, with an almost amused expression, he stated that the seniors clearly believed all juniors were weak and insignificant. As he spoke, Zeke released his aura. It surged outward, not explosively, but with terrifying pressure. Smiling faintly, Zeke proposed something simple. Instead of arguing, they should fight. From now on, everyone who wished to participate should battle freely, until only 7 remained standing. Laika pinched the bridge of her nose, murmuring that things were escalating far too quickly. She knew how dangerous this could become. Still, she forced herself to step in before chaos fully erupted. She clarified her proposal, a ranking battle. Anyone who wished to participate in the tournament would enter. Over the next 3 days, their results would be recorded, and rankings would be determined objectively. Those who ranked within the top 7 would represent the Eastern Nest. Seeing no better alternative and unwilling to back down publicly, Rick reluctantly approved the proposal. However, he dismissed it as a waste of time. After all, he was convinced the outcome was already decided. Laika turned back towards Zeke. She asked whether he intended to participate in the qualification battles as well. Zeke's eyes lit up immediately. Without hesitation, he answered that of course he would. Then, turning slightly, he looked toward Langus, Selena, and Raymond, calmly stating that they would be participating too. Langus stiffened in shock. He asked Zeke if he truly meant that they were going to fight senior students head-on. There was disbelief in his voice, more surprise than fear. Zeke confirmed it without the slightest doubt. He reminded them that they had trained relentlessly together, pushing themselves far beyond their limits. He asked them a simple question. What were they planning to do if they did not prove their results here? Selena let out a quiet breath, rolling her eyes as she admitted that the pressure was overwhelming. Even so, she acknowledged that running away now would only prove the seniors right. Raymond followed, stating that if this was happening, then he would give it everything he had. No excuses, no holding back. The 3 naturally took their places beside Zeke, forming their familiar lineup. Seeing this, Laika turned toward the other junior students and asked if anyone else wished to join the qualification battles. The response was hesitant. Some juniors murmured among themselves, pointing out that even if Laika and Zeke were confident, their opponents were still seniors. Many of them possessed 3-star mana ranks as well. To them, victory seemed impossible. Zeke listened in silence before muttering that he could not understand why everyone was already so demoralized. He stated that there was far more to gain from fighting a superior opponent than avoiding them. Even defeat, he believed, carried value. Experience, insight, and growth that could never be obtained by standing still. After a brief pause, he added that it no longer mattered. The moment had already come. As Zeke, Laika, and the juniors who had chosen to step forward stood ready. Zeke glanced toward the seniors with a faint, confident smile. Quietly, he remarked that it was finally time to see what the senior students were truly capable of.